This is the story of what happens when the absolute power of a comic book god is placed inside a man who is more concerned with the price of vegetables than the fate of the multiverse. If you want to see the exact moment the hierarchy of power in the DC universe crumbles, walk with me into the dust and the fire. The screaming started 3 blocks east of the Daily Planet, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the low hum of the city like a serrated knife. But it was swallowed almost instantly by the bass, heavy thrum of gravity cannons, leveling the architecture of tomorrow. Metropolis was burning. It was not the slow, smoldering burn of a natural disaster, nor the chaotic, rioting burn of civil unrest. This was the precise, militarized demolition of a city being dissected by weapons that did not belong on Earth. The air smelled of ozone and pulverized limestone, a thick gray choke that coated the back of the throat and tasted like old pennies. Down on the pavement, the temperature had spiked 20 degrees. In the last 6 minutes, a radiant heat that bubbled the asphalt and turned the windshields of abandoned cars into sagging, molten sheets of glass. Sergeant Tom Miller didn't look up. He knew better. He pressed his back harder against the rear wheel of his patrol unit, his knuckles white as they gripped the service pistol he hadn't fired in 3 years. The metal of the car door vibrating against his spine told him everything he needed to know about the caliber of the ordnance tearing up Fifth Avenue. Every impact felt like a physical blow, a rhythmic hammer striking the earth, shaking the fillings in his teeth. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of Intergang moving forward. Miller checked his watch, wiping a smear of blood and soot from the crystal with his thumb. 3 minutes. The dispatch had said 3 minutes. He just had to stay alive, keep his head down, and wait for the sky to tear open and the red cape to descend. That was the drill. That was the protocol. You survive, and then the gods arrive to fix the world. He risked a glance around the bumper of the cruiser. The scene was a nightmare rendered in high definition. A phalanx of Intergang heavy troopers clad in armor that looked like it had been scavenged from the scrap heaps of Apocalypse was marching down the center of the street. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They walked with the heavy hydraulic gait of men who knew they were invincible against human law enforcement. The leading trooper raised a cannon the size of a motorcycle, the barrel glowing with a sick, violet pulsing light. He didn't aim at the police line. He aimed at the base of the LexCorp auxiliary tower. The beam that erupted wasn't a laser. It was a cohesive bolt of gravimetric distortion. When it hit the lobby, the glass didn't shatter, it disintegrated into sand. The concrete pillars buckled, as if their molecular bonds had simply decided to quit. The entire front of the building groaned, a sound like a dying whale, before sliding casually into the street, crushing a row of taxis flat in a cloud of debris that blocked out the midday sun. "Hold fire," Miller screamed, his voice cracking over the roar of collapsing masonry. He grabbed a rookie by the vest, yanking the kid back down just as a stray bolt of energy vaporized the side mirror of their car. "Don't you be an idiot, kid. Put that gun away." "We have to do something, Sarge," the rookie yelled back, his eyes wide, reflecting the purple flashes of the alien weaponry. He was shaking, terrified, but filled with that dangerous, stupid bravery of someone who thought a 9mm slug could pierce new Genesis alloys. "They're killing people. We can't just sit here." "We aren't sitting, we're waiting," Miller roared, shoving the kid into the wheel well. "Look at that tech. That's Class 4 weaponry. You fire at them, they track the trajectory, and they turn this car into a coffin. We wait for the League. That is the job. We wait." This was the rot at the heart of the city. It wasn't the crime or the corruption or the alien invasions that happened every other Tuesday. It was the passivity, It was the learned helplessness of a species that had spent too long living in the shadow of the Übermensch. Why learn to fight when a man of steel could catch a falling plane? Why build better defenses when a woman of clay and magic could deflect tank shells with her wrists? The civilians trapped in the kill box weren't running. Miller could see them through the gaps in the smoke. People were huddled in the entrances of coffee shops and subway stations, but they weren't looking for exits. They were holding up their phones. They were live streaming their own potential deaths cameras pointed at the clouds, scanning the horizon for the streak of blue and red. They weren't praying to God. They were praying to the watchtower. The comments on the live feed scrolled by in a blur of emojis and demands. Where is he? Why is Flash late? Is Wonder Woman in Europe? The reliance was absolute. It was a religion where the miracle was guaranteed provided you waited long enough. But the waiting was getting harder. The impacts were getting closer. A shock wave from a secondary explosion lifted the patrol car a few inches off the ground, slamming it back down with a suspension-shattering crunch. Miller grit his teeth. The intergang squad was advancing. They were looking for something or someone, and they were clearing the path with the subtle grace of a bulldozer. These weren't the masterminds. These were the grunts empowered by technology they barely understood but loved to use. They were high on power, drunk on the ability to reshape the geography of a major American city with the pull of a trigger. 2 minutes, Miller whispered, staring at the second hand on his watch. It felt like moving through molasses. Come on, Big Blue. Don't make me die in this gutter. Above the carnage, the sky was a bruised purple reflecting the chaos below. The drones of the news networks buzzed like angry hornets, capturing the destruction in 4K resolution for the safety of viewers in Gotham and Central City. They zoomed in on the devastation, framing the crumbling skyline, the panicked crowds, the relentless advance of the high-tech terrorists. But the cameras missed the anomaly. They were looking for the boom tube, the swirling vortex of light that signaled a Justice League arrival, or the sonic boom of a Kryptonian breaking the sound barrier. They were looking for the spectacle. They missed the fracture. It didn't happen in the sky. It happened in the alleyway behind a shattered Starbucks, a narrow, garbage-strewn corridor that had miraculously escaped the bombardment. The air there didn't shimmer with majestic energy. It didn't glow. It simply twisted. It was as if reality had snagged on a nail. A pressure drop hit the alley sharp and sudden, popping the eardrums of the rats scurrying away from the fire. The brick wall on the left side of the alley didn't explode. It just ceased to exist in a perfect circular radius, replaced by a swirling gray void that looked less like a portal and more like a drain in a bathtub. There was no fanfare, no choir of angels, no triumphant horn section. The void spat something out and then snapped shut with a sound like a wet towel hitting a tile floor. The figure landed on the dirty pavement with a heavy, flat thud. He didn't land in a superhero crouch, three-point stance, head down, eyes glowing. He landed flat on his feet, stumbling slightly like a man who had missed a step on a staircase. He was dressed in a suit that defied all fashion logic of the current century, a blindingly bright yellow jumpsuit gloved in red rubber that looked like it belonged in a kitchen sink, and a white cape that hung limp and short, fluttering pathetically in the draft caused by the burning city. His head was perfectly aggressively bald, reflecting the flickering lights of the explosions nearby. Saitama blinked. He looked down at his right hand. He was holding a plastic grocery bag. It was torn. A single large daikon radish was protruding from the rip, bruised and snapped in half. A carton of eggs was dripping a slow, viscous yellow slime onto his red boot. "Ah," Saitama said. The voice was flat, devoid of the terror that was gripping the rest of the city. It was the voice of a man who had just dropped his toast, not a man standing in a war zone. The eggs. They're gone. He looked up, his expression a masterpiece of blank, simplified lines. He wasn't registering the gravimetric beams slicing through the air 100 yards away. He wasn't registering the screams. He was looking at the brick wall he had just phased through, which was now solid again. He patted the pockets of his yellow suit, searching for a receipt, a coupon, anything that could make sense of why he was no longer in Z City. I was just in the aisle, he muttered to himself, turning in a slow circle. There was a sale. 50% off on hot pot ingredients. I reached for the radish, and then the floor felt slippery. A massive explosion rocked the street outside the alley. A piece of a car door, twisted and burning, flew through the air, spinning like a shrapnel frisbee. It smashed into the dumpster next to Saitama, embedding itself deep in the metal, with a screech of tearing steel. The impact blew a cloud of garbage and ash over the yellow suit. Saitama didn't flinch. He didn't even adopt a combat stance. He just lifted a hand to shield his eyes from the dust, looking annoyed. He looked at the burning car door, then looked at his ruined groceries. This is a bad neighborhood, he concluded. Back on the main street, Sergeant Miller was screaming into his radio. Where is the backup? We are losing containment. They've breached the perimeter. They're targeting the civilians in the metro station. The intergang leader, a brute named Kanto, or at least a lieutenant trying to dress like him, laughed. It was a mechanically amplified sound booming from the speakers in his helmet. He leveled his gravity cannon at the huddled mass of people near the subway entrance. Your gods have abandoned you, sheep. The age of heroes is over today. Metropolis belongs to the strong. The weapon began to whine, the pitch rising as it charged a shot designed to collapse the subway tunnel and bury 300 people alive. The air warped around the barrel. The civilians stopped filming. They started screaming for real. The reality of death had finally pierced the screen of their phones. Miller stood up. He knew it was suicide. He raised his pistol, aiming at a target he knew he couldn't hurt, his hand shaking. Hey, the voice didn't come from the sky. It didn't come from a loudspeaker. It came from the side, cutting through the battlefield noise, not because it was loud, but because it was incredibly, confusingly casual. The intergang lieutenant paused. He turned his helmeted head. The police officers turned. The civilians lowered their phones slightly. Walking out of the smoke, dragging his feet slightly, was the bald man. He held the leaking grocery bag in one hand. He walked right past Sergeant Miller's patrol car, ignoring the officer's shout of warning. He walked right into the middle of the street, placing himself directly between the firing squad of alien tech soldiers and the weeping civilians. He didn't look at the soldiers. He was looking at the daikon radish in his bag, trying to see if the bottom half was salvageable. Citizen, get back. Miller screamed, his voice raw. You're going to get vaporized, one. The intergang lieutenant stared. His tactical HUD was scrolling through threat assessments. No armor detected, no cybernetics, no magic aura, no Kryptonian DNA. The threat level was absolute zero. It was just a guy. A guy in a costume that looked like it had been sewn by a child. What is this? The lieutenant scoffed, his voice booming. A jester you think you can stand before the vanguard of the new world. Saitama looked up. His face was drawn in that simple bored oval style, his eyes just two black dots. He pointed a red-gloved finger at the lieutenant. You guys represent the supermarket, Saitama asked. The... what? The lieutenant faltered, the sheer absurdity of the question throwing off his monologue. The supermarket, Saitama repeated, lifting the bag. I was in the middle of a transaction. Then there was a noise, and now I'm here and my eggs are broken, and you guys are making a lot of racket. It's really rude." The lieutenant's confusion turned instantly to rage. This was an insult, a mockery. "Die, insect," he roared. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The gravity cannon, fully charged, unleashed a beam of violet devastation. It was a shot meant to level a city block. It was a shot that had crippled tanks and brought down starships. The beam screamed across the 50 feet separating them, a tunnel of pure kinetic force that tore up the asphalt as it traveled, turning the road into a canyon. Miller closed his eyes. He didn't want to see the yellow idiot turn into red mist. The civilians screamed. The light was blinding. The beam hit Saitama, and then the sound stopped. It wasn't an explosion. It was a dispersal. The violet light washed over the yellow figure and simply broke. It was like watching a fire hose hit a granite cliff. The energy didn't penetrate. It splashed. It flowed around him, deflected by the sheer, impossible density of his existence, and dissipated harmlessly into the air, leaving nothing but a warm breeze that ruffled the white cape. Miller opened his eyes. The smoke cleared. Saitama was still standing there. He hadn't moved his feet. He hadn't raised a guard. He was looking at his suit. There was a smudge of soot on the yellow fabric near his chest. He frowned. He brushed the soot away with a quick, irritated flick of his hand. "That's dry clean only," Saitama said. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. The intergang lieutenant stared at his weapon, then at the bald man. His HUD was flashing error. The physics didn't make sense. The beam had hit. The target should be atoms. Saitama looked up at the lieutenant, his expression shifting slightly. The boredom remained, but a tiny hint of annoyance crept into his eyes. "Also," Saitama said, taking a step forward. The sound of his boot hitting the pavement echoed like a thunderclap, far louder than a footstep should be. "You made me drop the other half of my radish." The context was set. The prologue was over. The gods were late, but the anomaly was here. And he was very, very annoyed about his groceries. The silence that followed the dissipation of the gravity beam was not the silence of peace. It was the suffocating vacuum of logic, dying a violent death. The street, which moments ago had been a cacophony of screaming energy and crumbling infrastructure, was now held in a suspended state of disbelief. The air shimmered with residual heat, distorting the image of the bald man in the yellow suit like a mirage. But he was undeniably solid. He was standing in a crater of fused glass and smoking asphalt. The only untouched object in a radius of destruction that had leveled storefronts and turned cars into abstract art. Sergeant Tom Miller lowered his pistol, the barrel wavering. His brain, trained on 20 years of Metropolis crisis protocols, was frantically spinning through the Rolodex of known threats. Kinetic dampening field, no, there was no bubble. Phasing technology, no, the beam hit him, it washed over him. Kryptonian physiology, maybe. But Superman didn't stand there and let things hit him out of laziness. Superman stood there like a statue of hope, chest out, cape flowing. This guy was standing there like he was waiting for a bus that was 40 minutes late. He was slouching. The posture was all wrong. It was offensively casual. The intergang lieutenant, a towering figure encased in hydraulically assisted battle armor that hissed with venting coolant, took a step back. The metal of his boots crunched on the glass. The fear was there buried under the adrenaline, but it was quickly being replaced by the furious denial of a man whose worldview was predicated on the superiority of his weapons. He had a cannon that could crack a bunker, He had just fired it at a man wearing a cape that looked like a bedsheet. The math didn't add up, and for a zealot of technology, that was blasphemy. "System report," the lieutenant barked inside his helmet, his voice cracking slightly. "Target status. Why is he standing?" "Error." The HUD flashed in angry red letters across his vision. "Target structure intact. Kinetic transfer negligible. Biological density unreadable. Recalibrate." The lieutenant screamed, smashing his gauntleted fist against the side of his weapon. "It's a trick, a hard light hologram squad focus fire. Everything you have. Turn that patch of pavement into molten slag." The command broke the spell. The hesitation vanished, replaced by the drilled discipline of soldiers who knew that the only answer to an unkillable problem was to apply more violence. The Squad 12 heavy troopers armed with Apocalypse Tech retrofitted rifles spread out in a firing line. They didn't aim for precision. They aimed for saturation. The air erupted. It wasn't just bullets. It was a storm of coherent light plasma bolts and heavy-caliber, armor-piercing slugs depleted of uranium. The noise was deafening, a continuous roaring tear in the atmosphere that sounded like a jet engine grinding metal. The sheer volume of fire turned the street into a strobe-lit hellscape. Tracers drew lines of fire through the smoke, converging on the single yellow point in the center of the road. Miller threw himself flat behind the wheel of his cruiser, covering his head as the shock waves rattled his bones. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he muttered into the dirt. "They're going to liquefy him." But inside the kill zone, the experience was different. Saitama watched the projectiles coming towards him. To the soldiers, these were bullets traveling at supersonic speeds. To him, they were slow-drifting annoyances like gnats buzzing around a picnic. He could see the rotation of the slugs. He could see the heat distortion around the plasma bolts. He didn't bother to dodge. Dodging took effort. Dodging meant moving his feet, and he had just found a comfortable spot to stand where the ground wasn't too uneven. Ping, thwack, tink, clang. The sounds of impact were pathetic. They didn't sound like munitions hitting flesh. They sounded like hail hitting a tin roof. The heavy caliber rounds struck his chest, his shoulders, his shiny bald head. Upon contact, the physics of the bullets simply gave up. The lead mushrooms compressed instantly, flattening into perfectly round pancakes before dropping harmlessly to the ground. The plasma bolts splashed against his yellow jumpsuit, leaving faint, smoky trails that vanished in seconds. Saitama looked down at his chest. A particularly large slug had just bounced off his pectoral muscle and fallen into the open top of his grocery bag. "Hey," Saitama said, his voice swallowed by the roar of the guns but audible to himself. He reached into the bag and fished out the hot piece of metal. It was sizzling. It had landed right on top of the carton of eggs. "You guys are really pushing it now." He tossed the bullet over his shoulder. It hit a nearby streetlight with enough force to shatter the bulb, though he had barely flicked his wrist. The barrage continued for 20 seconds, then 30. The asphalt around Saitama was being chewed away layer by layer until he was standing on a solitary island of road, the ground around him excavated by the relentless energy fire. The smoke was so thick, it was impossible to see anything but the flashes of the guns. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" The lieutenant bellowed the barrels of his squad's weapons, glowing cherry red from overheating. "Vent heat! Check the kill!" The roar died down, replaced by the hissing of cooling weapon systems and the heavy breathing of the troopers. They waited, eyes fixed on the thick gray cloud of pulverized concrete and smoke that hung over the target zone. "Got him," one of the troopers grunted, a note of desperate hope in his voice. "Had to. Nothing survives that. Not even the Kryptonian takes that without getting pushed back. The clouds shifted. A breeze carrying the smell of burnt gunpowder and cheap fabric softeners swirled through the alley. Saitama was brushing his shoulder. He looked annoyed. Not angry anger implied he was engaged. He looked like a man who had just walked through a spider web. He slapped his left bicep, then his right thigh, dislodging flattened bullets that clattered to the ground like loose change. "You know," Saitama said, his voice cutting through the ringing silence with absolute clarity. "I bought these clothes at a discount store. The fabric isn't breathable. When it gets hot, it gets really itchy." He looked up at the lieutenant. The boredom was beginning to crack, revealing a terrifying glimpse of irritation. "You guys are making it hot." Sergeant Miller peeked over the hood of his car. His jaw unhinged. There wasn't a scratch on him, not a bruise, not a cut. The suit was dirty, yes, scorched in places, but the man inside was pristine. The realization hit Miller with the force of a physical blow. He didn't use a force field. He just stood there. The implications of that were terrifying. Superman had invulnerability, yes, but there was always a sense of effort, a brace against the impact. This was different. This was the invulnerability of a mountain to a rainstorm. It was a category error. The weapons weren't too weak. The target was simply outside the context of damage. The intergang lieutenant was hyperventilating. His sensors were screaming. The threat level was fluctuating wildly because the computer couldn't calculate a ceiling. "What are you?" The lieutenant shrieked, his voice amplified to a distorted screech. "Are you a new god, an avatar? Speak your name so we may carve it on your tomb." Saitama picked at his ear with a pinky finger, blowing something invisible off the tip. "I'm just a guy who's a hero for fun. And I'm trying to get home before the udon noodles go bad, but you broke my eggs." Mockery. The lieutenant lost his mind. The fear had nowhere to go but forward. He threw his weapon down. It was useless anyway. He reached behind his back and unslung a massive double-bladed war axe. The edges hummed with a dark, chaotic energy technology stolen from the deepest pits of apocalypse, capable of slicing through the hull of a battleship. "Squad suppression formation. Keep him pinned. I will take his head myself." The lieutenant activated his suit's thrusters. The hydraulics screamed as he launched himself into the air, a 2-ton missile of armor and rage. He arced high, blocking out the sun the axe raised for a killing blow that would split the street in half. It was a move that had killed lesser heroes. It was a move that demanded respect. "Die, false idol," the lieutenant roared as he descended gravity, accelerating his mass to terminal velocity. Saitama watched him come down. He didn't shift his stance. He didn't raise his hands to block. He just watched the axe head getting closer, the purple energy crackling the intent to kill, radiating off the armored giant. "You're too loud," Saitama muttered. Inside the slow-motion perception of the moment, Miller saw it happen. He saw the lieutenant descending a terrifying angel of death. He saw the axe edge sharp enough to cut atoms inches from the bald man's head. And then he saw the movement. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a kick. It was a slap. Saitama's right hand moved with the casual speed of someone swatting a fly that had landed on their lunch. It was a backhand motion, loose-wristed, almost lazy. The red glove connected with the flat of the axe blade just as it was about to make contact. Crack! The sound was not metallic. It was the sound of the sound barrier breaking instantly and violently in a confined space. The axe didn't just stop, it shattered. The alien alloy forged in the fire pits of a hell dimension disintegrated into glittering dust. But the momentum didn't stop there. The slap continued, connecting with the lieutenant's armored chest. There was no resistance. The heavy battle armor crumpled like a soda can. The kinetic force traveled through the metal, through the padding, and into the man inside, not as a lethal blow, but as a massive, overwhelming shove. The lieutenant was launched. He didn't fly backward. He vanished from his current position and reappeared 100 yards down the street, embedded deeply into the concrete facade of the First National Bank. He hit the wall with such force that the entire building shook, dust raining down from the windows 50 stories up. He stuck there, limbs dangling his armor, smoking, completely unconscious. The shockwave from the slap radiated outward. It blew the windows out of every car on the block. It knocked the remaining 12 troopers off their feet, sending them tumbling like bowling pins across the asphalt. It blew Sergeant Miller's hat off his head and pressed him flat against the tires of his cruiser. Silence returned to Fifth Avenue. This time it was absolute. Saitama stood with his hand still extended, looking at the destruction he had caused with a mild grimace. He retracted his arm and inspected his glove. Great, he sighed. Now I have alien axe dust on my glove. This is never going to wash out. He looked at the remaining troopers who were groaning on the ground. Their weapons scattered, their morale utterly vaporized. One of them, a massive brute who had been firing a Gatling laser moments ago, looked up at Saitama with eyes wide, filled with the primal terror of a prey animal realizing it had been hunting a predator. Saitama pointed a finger at him. The trooper flinched, curling into a ball. "Hey," Saitama said. "Do you know if there's another supermarket around here, one that's still open?" The trooper couldn't speak. He just shook his head, trembling. Far above the city, in the geosynchronous orbit of the watchtower, a console that had been monitoring the Metropolis disturbance suddenly lit up red. It wasn't a standard alarm. It wasn't the code for a doomsday event or a magical incursion or a speedster anomaly. It was a raw data input that defied classification. Batman, standing by the monitor, narrowed his eyes beneath the cowl. The sensors had picked up a kinetic spike. It was brief, less than a millisecond, but the intensity was impossible. It had the energy signature of a small nuclear detonation, but focused entirely into a kinetic wave with zero thermal fallout. Computer Batman's voice was gravel. "Isolate that spike. Triangulate the source." Source isolated, the computer's cool voice responded. Location Metropolis, Fifth Avenue. Signature biological. No match in database. "Show me Batman," commanded. The screen shifted, pulling the feed from a surviving traffic camera. The image was grainy, shaking from the aftershocks. It showed a devastated street, a squad of incapacitated intergang soldiers, and a hole in the side of a bank. And standing in the middle of it all, looking lost and slightly frustrated, was a bald man in a yellow suit, holding a broken bag of groceries. "Clark," Batman said, tapping his comms link, his voice urgent. "Diana, get to Metropolis, now. We have an unknown class entity, and I don't think he's one of ours." Back on the street, Miller slowly stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He looked at the man, the anomaly. The live stream on his phone, which had been lying face up on the dashboard, was going nuclear. The chat was scrolling so fast, it was a blur. "Did you see that one slap? Who is he? Rip Superman, he's bald." Miller walked out from behind the car. He didn't raise his gun. There was no point. He took a few shaky steps toward Saitama. The bald man turned to look at him, his face blank. "You..." Miller started, his voice rasping. "You just took out a Class 4 squad with a slap." Saitama looked at the unconscious lieutenant stuck in the wall, then back at Miller. He shrugged. "He was in my personal space," Saitama said. "And he was really loud. I hate loud people." He looked around the ruined street, scratching the back of his shiny head. So, about that supermarket. The physics of Metropolis were broken. Normally, when a force capable of embedding a 2-ton armored humanoid into a reinforced concrete wall is released, there is heat. There is the scent of ozone, the searing flash of friction, the thermal bloom of energy being violently converted. But the alleyway and the street outside the Starbucks were cold. The shock wave that had stripped the glass from the skyscrapers wasn't a wave of fire. It was a wave of pure displacement-based rejection. The air itself had simply been told to move, and it had obeyed with such violent haste that it had liquefied the windows of the LexCorp Tower 3 blocks away. Sergeant Miller stood in the center of this impossible coldness, his boots crunching on a carpet of diamond dust glass. He could feel the wind still swirling a confused vortex, trying to fill the vacuum left by the bald man's hand. He looked at the intergang lieutenant, who was now a permanent fixture of the First National Bank's facade, hanging 40 feet up like a grotesque gargoyle. The armor was flattened, not melted. The metal was cold to the touch of the wind. It was wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. In a city of aliens who shot lasers from their eyes and billionaires who dressed like bats, Miller thought he had seen every flavor of violence. But this was mundane violence scaled up to godhood. It was a bar fight slap magnified by a factor of 1 billion. High above the atmosphere, the binary brain of the Justice League watchtower was having a seizure. Batman sat at the primary monitor console, his gloved fingers flying across a holographic interface that was flashing a cascade of frantic crimson warnings. The Bat computer, a system designed to calculate the trajectory of Darkseid's Omega beams and decrypt the source code of Brainiac, was currently outputting a single flashing word, null. Report. Batman growled, his voice tight. Beside him, the empty chair usually reserved for Superman seemed to loom larger than usual. Clark was already breaking the sound barrier over the Atlantic, inbound from a relief mission in Sudan. But he was still 3 minutes out. 3 minutes was an eternity when the laws of physics were being rewritten. Analysis complete. The computer's synthetic voice replied, sounding almost hesitant. Kinetic event registered. Magical signature sent. Kryptonite radiation and speed force fluctuation sent. Divine mythological resonance. That's impossible, Batman muttered. Everything has a source. Is it technology a gravity drive? Negative. Source is biological. Target designation, human male. Estimated height 5'9". Estimated weight 154. LBS. Hair none. Batman paused. He pulled up the telemetry from the satellite grid, zooming in on the figure standing amidst the wreckage. The image resolution sharpened, revealing the yellow suit and the white cape, the red gloves. It looked like a costume bought at a discount party store. There was no armor plating, no exoskeleton, no mystic amulets glowing with eldritch power. Computer, Batman commanded. Run a power output simulation based on the structural damage to the bank and the velocity of the projectile. Calculate the strength required to generate that air pressure wave with a standing, flat-footed slap. The screen blurred as numbers cascaded. Then a graph appeared. The line went vertical. It didn't curve. It just shot straight up off the chart. Calculation error. Required newtons exceed integer limit. Suggested classification moon-level impact event. Confined to surface area of 1 human hand. Batman stared at the screen. Moon-level impact. From a slap. Without leverage. Without a running start. He didn't even pivot his hips, Batman whispered the detective in him, terrified by the biomechanical impossibility. He just moved his arm. Back on the ground, the fear had finally worked its way through the nervous systems of the remaining intergang troopers. They were sprawled on the asphalt, bruised and battered by the wind, but they were conscious. And with consciousness came the panic of men who realized their toys were broken. "It's a trick," screamed the heavy weapons specialist, scrambling to his feet. He was a massive man, chemically enhanced with venom, holding a rotary cannon that fired explosive plasma rounds. He's using mirrors. He's using a projection. Nothing is that hard. The denial was a defense mechanism. If the bald man was real, then everything the intergang soldier believed in power technology dominance was a lie. He couldn't accept the lie. So he squeezed the trigger. Thump, 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 thump. The rotary cannon spun, spitting out rounds of glowing green plasma at 600 rounds per minute. Each round was designed to melt through tank armor. The air screamed as the barrage tore across the short distance, separating the soldier from the anomaly. Miller flinched instinctively, raising his arm. "Stop, you'll kill us all." Saitama didn't move. He was busy looking at the expiration date on the bottom of the broken egg carton. The plasma rounds hit him. Or rather, they tried to hit him. The first round struck his bald head. Instead of exploding, the plasma simply splashed like water hitting a hot skillet. It hissed and evaporated, leaving not even a smudge on the skin. The second round hit his shoulder. It bounced off at a sharp angle, burying itself in the asphalt 3 feet away, and detonating there, blowing a crater in the street, while Saitama remained completely stationary. The barrage continued. It was a storm of explosive energy. Fire engulfed the yellow figure. Smoke billowed up thick and black, obscuring him completely. The intergang soldier kept screaming, holding the trigger down, until the weapon clicked dry, the barrels glowing white-hot. "Die, the soldier panted, his chest heaving. The smoke hung in the air, a heavy curtain of silence. "Did you get him, another trooper?" whispered, crawling out from behind a mailbox. From inside the smoke, a voice drifted out. It wasn't the voice of a dying man. It was the voice of mild inconvenience. "Man," the voice said, "this smoke smells like burnt plastic. It's going to get in the fabric." Saitama walked out of the cloud. He waved his hand in front of his face to clear the air. There was no scratch on him. The yellow suit was perfectly intact, protected by the invulnerable body beneath it. The only casualty was the grocery bag. The plastic had finally melted from the heat of the surrounding explosions, depositing the sad, broken remains of his dinner onto the road. Saitama stopped. He looked down at the puddle of egg yolk and crushed radish on the blackened asphalt. The air temperature seemed to drop. For the first time, the boredom on his face shifted. His eyebrows, or the muscles where eyebrows would be, lowered slightly. The shading on his face grew intense. The comedic, simple lines of his features hardened into something chiseled, serious, and terrifyingly intense. He looked up at the intergang soldier with the empty gun. "You," Saitama said. The soldier dropped the cannon. It clattered loudly on the ground. He took a step back, urine staining the front of his armored trousers. He looked into the eyes of the bald man and saw something that terrified him. A more than Batman's glare or Superman's heat vision. He saw the abyss of a power so absolute it didn't need to be angry to destroy him. "You broke my bag," Saitama said. The soldier stammered. "And now my dinner is on the floor." Saitama took a step forward. The psychological pressure emitted by that single step was heavier than the gravity cannon. It was a tangible aura of heaviness. The glass on the ground around Saitama's boots cracked into finer dust simply from the flex of his ankles. Miller watched, paralyzed. This was the anomaly. It wasn't just strength. It was the total absence of vulnerability. When Superman was shot, he stood firm, bracing against the impact his muscles taught. Saitama hadn't even braced. His body simply was. The bullets didn't bounce because he was tough. They bounced because compared to him, they didn't really exist. He was a fixed point in reality, and the rest of the world was just flimsy scenery trying to crash into him. I worked hard for those coupons. Saitama continued walking closer. The remaining intergang soldiers were scrambling backward, crawling over each other like crabs in a bucket to get away. Do you know how hard it is to find a sale on superior quality eggs in this economy? Monster one of the soldiers shrieked, pulling a combat knife and lunging in a suicide run. He drove the blade, an ultrasonic vibration knife capable of cutting diamonds, straight at Saitama's exposed stomach. Saitama didn't dodge. He looked down as the knife tip struck his abs. Snap. The blade shattered into a dozen pieces. The soldier stood there, holding a broken handle, his wrist sprained from the impact. Saitama looked at the soldier. That's dangerous. You could poke someone's eye out with that. He flicked his finger. Not a punch, just a flick like one would flick a marble. His finger hit the soldier's forehead. The soldier was launched backward with the velocity of a cannonball. He flew straight through the open doors of a UPS truck, parked down the block out the back doors, and tumbled for another 50 feet before rolling to a stop unconscious. Anyone else? Saitama asked, looking at the remaining squad members. They dropped their weapons. Unanimously. Instantly. The will to fight had been surgically removed from their brains. They fell to their knees, hands in the air, terrified sobbing filling the silence. Saitama sighed. The intense shadowed look vanished from his face, replaced instantly by the dopey, oval-eyed boredom. I guess not. But who is going to pay for my eggs? It was at that moment that the sky finally tore open. The distinct resonant whoosh of displaced air signaled the arrival of the cavalry. A blur of red and blue descended from the clouds, slowing rapidly to hover 10 feet above the ground. The cape flowed perfectly in the wind. The S-shield caught the sunlight, gleaming with hope and authority. Superman had arrived. He floated there, eyes scanning the scene in milliseconds. X-ray vision stripped away the walls to check for survivors. Microscopic vision analyzed the structural integrity of the bank. Super hearing picked up the heartbeats of the terrified soldiers and the stunned police sergeant. And then his gaze landed on Saitama. Superman frowned. His senses were telling him conflicting stories. His eyes saw a human, a normal, slightly skinny human with poor posture and no hair. But his ears heard nothing. Not the rhythmic thrum of a metahuman heart, not the crackle of energy. Just a quiet, slow beat. Thump, thump. A resting heart rate of 48. But the destruction around this man, the heat signatures of the plasma that had failed to burn him, the crater where he stood, told a different story. Superman lowered himself to the ground, his boots touching the pavement lightly. He walked past the cowering intergang soldiers, who looked relieved to see him, as if being arrested by Superman was a mercy compared to staying near the bald man. Officer Miller's Superman said, his voice calm, reassuring the voice that settled panic. Are you injured? No. No, Superman, Miller stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Saitama. He stopped them. He just stood there. Superman turned to Saitama. He offered a polite diplomatic smile, the smile he used for confused civilians or new heroes who didn't know the ropes. Citizen Superman said, stepping forward, his hand extended, in a gesture of peace. That was incredibly dangerous. You could have been killed. These men are armed with Class A weaponry. Saitama looked up. He squinted at the floating man, then at the bright colors, the underwear on the outside, the perfect hair. "Oh," Saitama said. "Another weirdo in a costume." Superman blinked. The smile faltered for a microsecond. "I'm Superman." "Okay," Saitama said. He pointed at the mess on the ground. "Do you think the store will give me a refund if I bring them the shells? Or is that against store policy in this city?" Superman stared at him. The scanner in the watchtower was still flashing null. The greatest hero on Earth stood before the greatest anomaly in the multiverse, and the anomaly was asking about a refund policy for eggs. The cold open was finished. The anomaly was established. The world was broken, and the investigation was about to begin. The visual dissonance on Fifth Avenue was enough to give a normal person a migraine. On one side hovered the Man of Steel, a being of such physical perfection that he looked like a statue carved from diamond and wrapped in the flag of a benevolent nation. His cape moved with a hypnotic fluid grace, defying the chaotic wind currents of the burning city. Every muscle was defined, every inch of him, radiating a subtle bioelectric aura of solar power that felt like standing next to an open oven door. He was the thesis statement of the superhero genre, power presence and divine aesthetics. On the other side stood the antithesis. Saitama looked like a thumb that had been drawn on by a child with a shaky hand. His yellow jumpsuit was loose in the knees and elbows, bunching up in unflattering folds. His white cape was stained with soot and possessed the thread count of a cheap bedsheet. And then there was the head, a perfectly smooth, shiny dome that reflected the S-shield on Superman's chest like a funhouse mirror. He stood with his shoulders slumped, his weight shifting onto one hip, projecting an aura of absolute, profound emptiness. Superman floated 2 inches off the ground, his boots hovering over the broken glass. He was doing what he always did, analyzing the threat. His eyes, blue as glacial ice, narrowed slightly as he engaged his microscopic vision. He focused on the bald man's skin. He expected to see something alien, perhaps a carbon-latticed dermal layer, like a Kryptonian or a chaotic magical ward woven into the cellular structure like an Amazon, or even a shifting nanotech field like a cyborg. He saw skin, just human epidermis, dead cells on top, living cells underneath, pores, sweat glands, a tiny ingrown hair follicle on his chin. There was no density spike, no exotic radiation. Beneath the skin, Superman saw normal muscle fiber, normal bone density, a normal human heart beating at a sluggish, bored rhythm. This makes no sense. Superman thought his superbrain processing the data at light speed. The structural damage to the bank required gigajoules of force. The lieutenant's armor was collapsed by a kinetic impact equivalent to a freight train. But this man has the physiology of a gym teacher who does cardio twice a week. "Excuse me." Superman said, his voice resonating with that practiced, calming baritone that could stop riots. "I don't think you understand the situation. Those men were using apocalyptian technology. A single stray shot could have vaporized you." Saitama looked up from the puddle of egg yolk. He blinked, his expression vacuous. Vaporized. That sounds bad. But not as bad as wasting a Saturday sale. He kicked a piece of the intergang armor with the toe of his red boot. The piece of metal weighing 200 pounds skittered across the street like a hockey puck, embedding itself in a concrete planter. Superman's eyes widened a fraction. The kick was casual, too casual. "Who are you?" Superman asked, descending until his boots touched the ground. He towered over Saitama by half a foot. Are you a meta-human? An off-world visitor? I'm Saitama, the bald man said. I'm a hero for fun. For fun, Superman repeated the concept alien to a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders as a sacred duty. Yeah, just a hobby. I used to do it part-time, but now I guess I'm professional. I don't know, the ranking system is weird. Saitama sighed, finally making eye contact. Hey, you're the guy from the TV. Super something. Do you know a good place to buy hot pot beef? This whole block is wrecked. Sergeant Miller, still clutching his sidearm, watched the interaction with the feeling that he was hallucinating. He had seen Superman talk to God's demons and intergalactic tyrants. He had never seen Superman look this bewildered. It was like watching a grandmaster chess player sit down opposite a pigeon, and the pigeon was winning by eating the pieces. But the city was not safe yet. The boss rush logic of the universe demanded escalation. High above on the rooftop of the partially collapsed LexCorp auxiliary tower, a shadow moved. It was not a grunt. It was Deadshot, or at least a mercenary charging Deadshot prices. He was prone, his eye pressed to the scope of a weapon that was illegal in 12-star systems. It wasn't a sniper rifle. It was a mass driver, a portable railgun designed to punch holes in tank battalions. The mercenary had been paid to kill the Red Cape. The contract was simple: wait for the distraction, take the shot. The distraction was the intergang assault. The target was stationary, distracted by some bald civilian. Target locked, the mercenary whispered. Kryptonian shielding is down. He's distracted. He didn't aim for the head. Superman could catch bullets. He aimed for the center of mass, firing a depleted promethium slug accelerated to Mach 7. The trigger clicked. The railgun hissed. Boom! The sound of the shot arrived after the bullet. The slug tore through the air, creating a vacuum tunnel of superheated plasma. It was aimed directly at Superman's chest. Superman heard the mechanical click of the trigger a split second before the firing pin hit. His reflexes, honed by a lifetime of combat, kicked in. He spun his hand, coming up to catch the projectile, his eyes tracking the blur of the slug. But he had miscalculated one thing. Saitama, bored by the conversation about safety, had taken a step to the left to look at a vending machine that had fallen over. He stepped directly into the path of the bullet, meant for the Man of Steel. No, Superman shouted, his hand outstretched, but the geometry was wrong. He couldn't reach in time. The slug, traveling at 7 times the speed of sound, struck the side of Saitama's bald head just above the ear. The impact should have been catastrophic. A round like that hitting a human skull would result in a pink mist. There would be no head left. The kinetic energy transfer alone would liquefy the upper torso. Clink. The sound was sharp and high-pitched, like a marble dropping onto a granite countertop. The promethium slug, designed to pierce the hull of a spaceship, hit Saitama's skin. It didn't penetrate. It didn't deform the skin. It simply stopped dead, all of its kinetic energy instantly negated by the unyielding surface of the bald man's cranium. The bullet flattened into a coin-sized disc and fell onto the shoulder of his yellow suit, then tumbled to the ground. Saitama didn't even stumble. His head jerked slightly to the side, the way one reacts when a large fly bumps into them. He reached up and scratched the spot where the bullet had hit. "Oh," Saitama said flatly. "Mosquito?" Superman froze. His hand was still outstretched, his cape billowing around him. He stared at the flattened bullet on the ground. He could see the heat radiating off it. It was white-hot from friction. He looked at Saitama's head. There was a faint red mark already fading. "You," Superman whispered. You just took a Mach 7 railgun round to the temple. Saitama looked at his finger, checking for blood. There was none. I thought it was a bug, or maybe a pebble. This neighborhood is really dangerous. People just throwing stuff around. The mercenary on the roof stared through his scope. He didn't blink. He couldn't. He had seen the hit. He had seen the pink mist in his mind. Instead, he saw the bald guy scratch his head. Impossible, the mercenary hissed. Dud round? Must be. He racked the bolt. He fired again, and again. Boom, boom. 2 more slugs tore through the air. Superman moved to intercept, but he stopped. He needed to see. He needed to know. The second bullet hit Saitama in the back of the neck. It bounced off with a ping. The third bullet hit him in the shiny curve of his head, ricocheting straight up into the sky. Saitama turned around, looking annoyed. Okay, who is throwing rocks? He squinted up at the skyscraper. The sun was in his eyes, but his vision, while not X-ray, was impossibly sharp when he bothered to focus. He saw the glint of the scope on the roof 40 stories up. Found you, Saitama muttered. He bent down. Superman watched, fascinated. Was he going to fly up there, use heat vision? Saitama picked up a piece of loose asphalt about the size of a golf ball. He weighed it in his hand, feeling the texture. Hey, Saitama shouted at the rooftop, his voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. Stop throwing stuff, it's annoying. He drew his arm back. Superman's senses screamed a warning. The air pressure around Saitama dropped again. The stance was terrible, feet parallel, no rotation, but the energy gathering in that arm was cataclysmic. Saitama threw the rock. It wasn't a throw, it was a launch. Crack boom. The rock left his hand and broke the sound barrier instantly. It didn't just break it, it shattered it. A cone of condensed air formed around the stone, turning it into a meteorite. The friction turned the rock into a streak of glowing plasma. It crossed the distance to the rooftop in a nanosecond. The mercenary didn't even have time to realize he was dead. The rock hit the railgun. The railgun vaporized. The rock continued hitting the water tower behind the mercenary. The water tower exploded, sending a geyser of steam and twisted metal 500 feet into the air. The shock wave of the impact blew the top 2 floors of the LexCorp auxiliary tower clean off. Debris rained down like confetti. The mercenary, miraculously alive, but blown backward into a ventilation shaft by the pressure wave, lay groaning in the wreckage of his nest, his weapon reduced to molten slag. Down on the street, the sonic boom from the throw finally caught up, shattering the remaining windows of the surrounding buildings. Superman's cape whipped violently forward. Saitama dusted his hands off on his pants. There. That should stop him. He turned back to Superman. So, about the beef. Superman looked at the smoking ruin of the skyscraper's roof. He looked at the pebble-sized crater in the asphalt where Saitama had stood. He looked at the man. For the first time in a long time, Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He had fought beings stronger than him before Doomsday Darkseid Mongol. But they were monsters. They were physics amplified. You could understand them. You could hear their muscles straining. You could feel their rage. This man had just delivered a tactical airstrike with a piece of driveway gravel, and his heart rate hadn't even gone up. It was actually slower now. He was bored. Who? What are you? Superman asked the question, escaping him before he could filter it. I told you, Saitama said, picking up his empty grocery bag and looking at it mournfully. I'm just a guy, and I'm hungry. Suddenly, the air filled with the sound of sirens. Not police sirens, these were deeper, more resonant tones. The heavy thrum of the Batwing engines echoed off the canyon walls of the city. A sleek, black shadow descended from the clouds, hovering ominously over the street. Batman. And he wasn't alone. A golden lasso unspooled from the sky, and Wonder Woman landed with a heavy, graceful impact next to Superman's sword-drawn shield raised. The Flash blurred into existence, vibrating with nervous energy, stopping next to the sergeant's car. The Justice League had arrived. They formed a perimeter, weapons ready, eyes locked on the threat. They looked at the intergang soldiers unconscious in the walls. They looked at the smoking skyscraper. And then they all looked at the bald man in the yellow suit. Status Wonder Woman commanded, her voice like steel. She looked at Superman. Cal, is this the hostel? Superman looked at his friends. He looked at Saitama, who was now checking his pockets for loose change. I don't know, Diana. Superman said, his voice quiet. He's not hostile, but what Batman demanded, dropping from the cockpit of the Batwing and landing with a heavy thud, his cape enveloping him like a shadow. He held a scanner in his hand, pointing it directly at Saitama. But he's unbreakable, Superman said. I watched a railgun slug bounce off his head, and he threw a rock through a building. The Flash vibrated closer, circling Saitama in a blur of red lightning. Whoa. Fast, but he looks kinda plain. No offense, Baldy. Saitama looked at the Flash. Stop running in circles. You're kicking up dust. He turned to the assembled gods of the DC universe. The Trinity, the greatest power in the world. They were tense, ready for a fight that could crack the planet. Saitama held up his broken bag. Do any of you guys have a car? He asked. I missed the bus, and I really don't want to walk home. My boots are sticky from the eggs. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. This was the reveal. The moment the hierarchy was challenged. They stood in their armor, their divine heritage, their tragic backstories. He stood in his polyester suit. And the terrifying thing was looking at him standing there, utterly unimpressed by the Justice League. Superman had the sinking suspicion that if they fought, the Justice League would lose. Take him into custody, Batman ordered, his voice low. We need to know what he is. Containment Protocol Omega. Saitama sighed. Custody, does that mean jail? Do they serve lunch in jail? He looked at Superman. Hey, blue guy, if I go with the Bat cosplayer, can we stop for food on the way? Location, 5th Avenue, Ruins, Metropolis. Time 12 or 8 p.m. The standoff was absolute. The Justice League stood in a semicircle, a pantheon of modern mythology, arrayed against a man who looked like he had dressed in the dark. The wind whipped Superman's cape and Batman's cowl, creating a cinematic tableau of heroism. In contrast, Saitama's cape just sort of flapped limply, getting tangled around his legs. He reached down to untangle it, presenting his backside to the Dark Knight, a tactical error that would have resulted in a takedown for anyone else on the planet. Do not move. Batman growled, his voice a low-frequency rumble that usually induced bladder failure in criminals. He held a device in his gauntlet, a complex scanner oscillating through every known frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum. We are not finished here. You are an unregistered combatant in a federal disaster zone. You have displayed Omega-level kinetic output. You are coming to the watchtower for classification. Saitama stood up, the cape finally free. He looked at Batman, then at the device. Is that a Game Boy? You guys have really old toys? It is a biometric resonance scanner, Batman said, stepping closer, the white lenses of his cowl narrowing. And it's telling me nothing. Which means you are jamming it. How are you jamming it? I'm not jamming anything, Saitama said, picking his ear. I'm just standing here, and I'm hungry. Seriously, does the bat plane have a drive-through mode? I'm starving. Superman stepped between them, playing the diplomat, though his internal sensors were screaming at him to be careful. He looked at Saitama with a mixture of professional concern and deep biological confusion. He activated his X-ray vision again, pushing it to the limit. He peered through the yellow fabric, through the skin, into the very marrow of the man's bones. It was maddening. Superman had looked inside gods. He had seen the burning nuclear fires of firestorm matrices, the cold void of undead revenants, and the complex machinery of cyborgs. Inside Saitama, he saw a slightly calcium-deficient skeletal structure and a stomach that was currently empty and rumbling. There was no source. There was no organ generating the force field that had stopped the railgun slug. There were no nanites reinforcing his skin. His muscles were dense, yes, but not Kryptonian dense. They were just human muscles. It's a lie. Superman's mind raced. It has to be. He's masking his true form. Maybe he's a projection, a psionic construct. We just want to talk, Superman said, his hands raised, palms open. You saved lives today. We appreciate that. But surely you understand that we can't just let someone with your capabilities walk away without knowing who they are. I told you, Saitama said, his voice dripping with the fatigue of a man repeating his order at a noisy drive-through. I'm Saitama. I'm a hero. I live in Z City. My apartment is small, but the rent is cheap. Is this an interrogation? Am I under arrest for saving the bank? You destroyed the top 3 floors of the LexCorp Tower, Flash interjected, stopping his vibration for a second to point at the smoking ruin. There was a bad guy on it, Saitama reasoned. He broke the building first. I just finished it. Before the debate on collateral damage could continue, the ground beneath them lurched. It wasn't a tremor. It was a heave, as if the earth itself was trying to vomit something up. The pavement 50 yards down the street near the entrance to the subway station, where the civilians were still cowering, exploded upward. Asphalt rained down like black hail. From the hole, a mechanical nightmare clawed its way into the sunlight. It was a war strider, an experimental intergang siege engine, likely the backup plan if the infantry squad failed. It stood 30 feet tall, a tripod of black metal and glowing red eyes. Its chassis was covered in reactive armor plating, and its primary weapon, a condensed plasma cannon capable of melting a hole through a battleship, was mounted on a swiveling turret that looked uncannily like a shark's head. The machine let out a sound that wasn't mechanical. It was a synthesized roar, a psychological weapon designed to induce terror. Targets acquired, the Strider's voice boomed, shaking the dust off the nearby cars. Justice League detected. Initiating Omega Protocol. Purge all biologicals. The League moved instantly. It was a beautiful practice at a ballet of violence. Diana, flank right. Flash, crowd control. Get the civilians out of the blast zone. Batman, target the knee joints. Superman barked the orders before the debris had even settled. He launched himself into the air, a red and blue blur, his fists clenched, ready to draw the machine's fire. Wonder Woman was already moving, her shield-raised deflectors gleaming. Flash vanished, a streak of lightning, ferrying people away from the subway entrance. Batman fired a grappling hook, swinging up to a gargoyle to get a vantage point. They were professional. They were efficient. They were working hard. Saitama stood still. He watched the giant robot step out of the hole. The machine was massive. It blocked the sun. Its shadow fell over Saitama. Hey, Saitama said, but nobody heard him over the roar of the machine's charging plasma cannon. The War Strider ignored the flying man and the running man. Its logic processors identified the closest threat based on proximity, not power level. It looked down at the bald man standing in the middle of the road. Obstruction detected. The machine boomed. Eliminate. The Strider raised a massive hydraulic leg. The foot was a slab of solid titanium weighted to crush tanks. It slammed down, aiming to flatten Saitama into a paste. Superman mid-flight saw it happen. No, he shouted, changing his trajectory. He dove arms, outstretched, intending to catch the giant metal foot before it crushed the civilian. He pushed his speed, the air cracking around him. I have to save him. He's durable, but that's 50 tons of hydraulic pressure. He wasn't fast enough. Saitama looked up at the descending foot. He didn't look scared. He looked disappointed. You're blocking the sun, Saitama muttered. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He simply raised his left hand palm open, as if he were high-fiving the air. The 50-ton foot slammed into his palm. Clang! The sound was deafening, a bell being struck by a mountain. The pavement around Saitama's feet shattered, creating a spiderweb of cracks that extended for 20 feet. Dust billowed out. But Saitama's arm didn't buckle. It didn't even bend. He held the massive mechanical leg in place with the casual ease of a waiter holding a tray. The War Strider's engines whined, gears grinding as it tried to push down. It applied maximum pressure. The hydraulics hissed, leaking fluid. Saitama stood there, holding 50 tons. He looked at Superman, who had stopped in midair, hovering 10 feet away, staring. Is this thing with you guys? Saitama asked Superman. It's really rude. Superman's jaw tightened. It's Intergang, a war machine. Oh, Saitama said. Junk mail. Saitama pushed. He didn't brace his legs. He just extended his arm upward. The 30-foot-tall War Strider was launched into the air. Not tipped over. Launched. It flew upward as if gravity had suddenly reversed. The machine flailed its gyroscope, screaming in confusion as it cleared the height of the surrounding buildings. It's loud, Saitama said. As the machine reached the apex of its accidental flight, Saitama jumped. This was the moment that broke Sergeant Miller's brain. When Superman jumped, you saw the crouch, the explosion of power. When Flash ran, you saw the blur. Saitama simply vanished from the ground and appeared in the sky next to the robot. There was no transition. 1 millisecond he was on the ground. The next, he was 50 feet in the air. Go away, Saitama said. He swung his hand. It was a backhand slap, a shooing motion. His red glove connected with the chassis of the War Strider. The impact didn't crumple the metal. It atomized the point of contact. The kinetic force traveled through the machine so fast that the rear armor plating blew off before the front plating had time to deform. The robot was instantly accelerated to hypersonic speed. It became a streak of fire in the sky, a comet traveling horizontally. It cleared the city limits in 2 seconds. It cleared the state line in 4. Far away, over the Atlantic Ocean, a massive splash was registered by sonar buoys, followed by a shock wave that capped waves for 3 miles. Saitama landed back on the street. He landed softly, barely kicking up dust. He dusted his hands off. Finally, quiet. The street was silent. The Justice League had stopped. Wonder Woman lowered her shield, her Amazonian eyes wide. She respected strength. She knew the strength of Heracles, of Zeus, of Atlas. Strength was effort. Strength was struggle. This was not strength. This was an editing error in reality. Batman dropped from the gargoyle, landing silently, but his heart rate monitor betrayed him. It was spiking. Superman floated down, landing in front of Saitama. He looked at the sky where the robot had vanished. He calculated the trajectory. He calculated the mass. He calculated the force required to accelerate 50 tons to Mach 10 with a slap. Superman started, then stopped. He looked at Saitama's feet. You didn't use leverage. Lever what? Saitama asked, digging in his ear again. Leverage, Superman insisted, his voice rising with the frustration of a physicist, seeing 2 + 2 equal a fish. To generate that force, you need to push against the ground. You need to anchor yourself. You just stood there. You pushed up without pushing down. That violates Newton's third law. Saitama looked blankly at the man of steel. Newton, is he the guy who owns the apple orchard? Look, I don't know about laws. I just push the thing and the thing goes away. Sergeant Miller, still hiding behind his car, finally stood up. He walked out into the open, ignoring the protocol to stay back. He looked at the bald man. Miller had been a cop in Metropolis for 20 years. He had seen Superman save the city 1,000 times. But when Superman saved the city, it felt like a favor from a god. It felt distant. Beautiful, but distant. This guy slapped a robot because it was annoying. Hey, Miller shouted. Saitama turned. Yeah, that was, Miller struggled for the word. That was efficient. Saitama shrugged. I guess it was just in the way. Batman stepped forward, his cape flowing around him like a shroud of darkness. He was not impressed. He was calculating. You are a danger. You have no control. You have no training. You treat Omega-level threats like garbage. Saitama interrupted. Well, they are garbage. They interrupted my shopping. He turned to walk away. I'm going to find a convenience store. You guys have fun with your posing. Wait, Superman said, stepping in front of him. We can't just let you go. We need to know if you're a threat to this planet. Saitama stopped. He looked at Superman. For a second, the air grew heavy again. The two strongest beings in the universe stood nose to nose. One radiated solar majesty. The other radiated the energy of a man who wanted a nap. I'm not a threat, Saitama said, unless you're a mosquito or a sale that ends in 5 minutes. He leaned in closer to Superman. By the way, Saitama whispered, your underwear is showing. You should really wear pants over that. It's drafty. Superman blinked. He looked down at his classic red trunks. He looked back at Saitama. They're part of the uniform. It's Kryptonian ceremonial. Whatever, Saitama said, waving his hand. Just giving you a tip. Fashion is important. And then he just walked away. He didn't fly. He didn't super speed. He just jogged down the street, his white cape flapping, his yellow suit looking ridiculous against the backdrop of the burning city. The Justice League watched him go. Do we stop him? Flash asked, vibrating nervously. I can stop him. Maybe. Actually, probably not. Did you see that robot? He slapped it into the ocean, guys. The ocean. No, Batman said, his voice grim. We don't engage. Not here. Not yet. Why not? Wonder Woman asked. He is an unknown variable. Because Batman said, turning to look at the crater where the robot had stood. If we fight him right now, I don't think we win. And I need to know why. Superman watched the yellow figure turn the corner and disappear. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't fear exactly. It was insecurity. For his entire life, Clark Kent had been the ceiling. He was the measure by which all power was judged. He was the strongest. But watching Saitama jog away looking for a bargain on beef, Superman realized something terrifying. The ceiling had just been shattered by a bald man who didn't even care that there was a ceiling in the first place. The world didn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ended with a tweet. Or at least the world as the Justice League knew it. The footage of the slap heard round the world, captured by a drone that had miraculously survived the EMP blast of the War Strider, was currently the most watched video in human history. It had 3 billion views in 2 hours. The title wasn't Superman Saves Metropolis. It was Bald Guy Slaps Robot into Orbit Real. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. The narrative of the gods protecting the sheep had cracked. For decades, the public had accepted that safety came from the sky, delivered by beings who floated above the grit and grime. But the video showed something else. It showed a guy standing on the ground, annoyed dirty, holding a plastic bag, who treated a terrifying alien superweapon like a drunk stumbling into him at a bar. It was relatable. It was hilarious. And for the powers that be, it was terrifying. Location: the Batcave, Gotham City. Time 4:00 p.m. The silence of the cave was broken only by the hum of the supercomputer and the rhythmic tapping of Bruce Wayne's fingers on the console. The giant penny loomed in the shadows. The dinosaur stood silent. But on the massive main screen, a slow-motion loop played over and over Saitama's hand, connecting with the War Strider. Bruce wasn't wearing the cowl. He was staring at the telemetry data with bloodshot eyes. Alfred Bruce said, not turning around, "Run the simulation again. Variable speed force residue." "I have run it 17 times. Master Bruce Alfred's voice came from the darkness, accompanied by the clink of a tea tray. The result remains consistent. There is no speed force. There is no magic. There is no metagene activation. Then how Bruce slammed his fist onto the desk. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. To generate that much kinetic force, he needs an energy source. Is he absorbing ambient solar radiation? Like Clark, is he tapping into the zero-point field? Perhaps Alfred suggested gently placing a cup of tea near the keyboard. He is simply strong. Bruce turned his eyes, narrowing. That's not an answer, Alfred. Strong has limits. Superman has limits. Doomsday has limits. Physics has limits. This man, he broke the model. The friction from that slap should have ignited the atmosphere. It didn't. The impact should have shattered his arm. It didn't. He is ignoring the equal and opposite reaction. On the screen, a new window popped up. It was a live feed from a surveillance drone Bruce had deployed to Metropolis. The drone was hovering outside a rundown convenience store in the suicide slum district. Through the grimy window, the camera captured Saitama. He was standing in the aisle reading a manga. He looked completely at peace. He wasn't meditating. He wasn't recharging. He was laughing at a joke in the book. He's reading, Bruce whispered. The most dangerous entity on the planet is reading a comic book. And Eating Alfred noted, zooming in. Is that a corn dog? We need to test him, Bruce said, standing up and pulling the cowl back over his face. The Batman voice returned deeper, darker. I can't plan for a variable I don't understand. I need to know his upper limit. And I need to know his psychological trigger. Master Bruce Alfred warned, if you provoke him, I won't provoke him. Batman said, moving toward the Batmobile. But I know someone who will. Location: LexCorp Tower, Metropolis. Penthouse office. Lex Luthor stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the smoke rising from the city. He swirled a glass of brandy, his expression unreadable. Behind him, on a massive wall of screens, the Bald Guy video was playing on every channel. Lex was smiling. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found the missing piece of a puzzle he had been trying to solve for 20 years. Mercy, Lex said softly. Mercy Graves, his bodyguard and assistant, stepped out of the shadows. Yes, Mr. Luther. Look at him, Lex said, gesturing with his glass toward the screen where Saitama was scratching his butt while the War Strider charged him. Do you see it? See what's an anomaly? No, Lex turned, his eyes gleaming with manic intelligence. I see the death of Superman. He walked to his desk and pressed a button. A holographic schematic appeared. It was Project Doomsday. But it was different. The genetic markers were aggressive, unstable. For years, Lex lectured, pacing the room. I have tried to prove that Superman is a fraud, that his alien heritage makes him a threat. But the people love him because he is godlike. They worship the power gap. He pointed at Saitama on the screen. But this man, he is human. Look at him. He's pathetic. He's ugly. He has no style. He is the ultimate common man. And yet, he is stronger than the alien. Lex laughed, a low, cruel sound. If a human can be stronger than Superman, then Superman is no longer a god. He is just an alien tourist, an obsolete model. What are your orders, Sir? Mercy asked. We need to verify the asset, Lex said. I need to know if he can bleed. I need to know if he can be bought. And if he can't be bought, I need to know if he can kill. He tapped a command on his desk. Initiate Protocol Gauntlet. Send the testing squad, Lex ordered. Not the grunts. Send the specialists. Send the ones who can hurt Superman. Let's see how our bald friend handles the rogues gallery. Location: Suicide Slum, Metropolis. Time: 4:30 p.m. Saitama walked out of the convenience store. He was in a better mood. He had found a corn dog that was 20% off because it had been under the heat lamp too long. It was a bit dry, but a bargain was a bargain. Not bad, he mumbled, chewing. Still not as good as the udon place back home, but it'll do. He walked down the cracked sidewalk. The people of Suicide Slum, hardened, cynical, used to being ignored by the Justice League, stared at him. They had seen the video. They recognized the yellow suit. Hey, a kid sitting on a stoop whispered. That's him. That's the slap guy. No way, his friend replied. He looks like a dork. Saitama ignored them. He was thinking about whether he should buy a new cactus for his window. Suddenly, the ground in front of him dissolved. It wasn't an explosion. The concrete just turned to liquid mud. Saitama stopped, his foot hovering over the sludge. Gross, he said. From the mud, a figure rose. It was a hulking, shifting mass of clay. Clayface. The villain roared, shaping his arms into massive spiked maces. Luthor sends his regards, Tiny Man. Let's see if you can slap mud. Saitama looked at the monster. You got dirt on my boot. Clayface swung. The mace was the size of a Volkswagen. It hit Saitama directly on top of the head. Splat. The clay exploded outward, unable to transfer any force to the immovable object. Saitama didn't budge. He just stood there, covered in brown sludge. Are you serious? Saitama sighed. I just got this cleaned. I am the earth itself, Clayface bellowed, reforming his arm and engulfing Saitama. He tried to suffocate him, to fill his lungs with mud. You can't punch what you can't touch. Saitama stood inside the suffocating mass of clay. He felt the pressure building. He felt the villain trying to invade his nostrils. This is unhygienic, Saitama muffled. He took a deep breath. And then he sneezed. Achoo. It wasn't a normal sneeze. It was a hurricane generated inside a human respiratory system. The shockwave from the sneeze blew Clayface apart. Not just apart, it vaporized the moisture in his body. The villain screamed as he was blasted into a million dry, dusty particles that scattered across 3 city blocks. The mud was instantly turned into a harmless cloud of topsoil. Saitama wiped his nose with his glove. Man, I think I'm allergic to dust. He kept walking. 2 blocks later, the air shimmered. Mirror Master stepped out of a reflection in a shop window. He held a specialized gun that fired dimensional shards. "You're fast," Mirror Master sneered. "But can you fight your own reflection?" He fired. A beam hit the air in front of Saitama, creating a mirror dimension duplicate. A shadow Saitama stepped out. The duplicate looked exactly like Saitama. Same dead eyes, same bad posture. "Oh," Saitama said, "he's handsome." The shadow Saitama threw a punch. The real Saitama threw a punch. The fists collided. Crack. Reality shattered. Literally. The mirror dimension collapsed instantly. The feedback loop of infinite force meeting infinite force caused Mirror Master's gun to explode in his hands. The villain was thrown backward through the window he came from, covered in shards of glass. The shadow Saitama vanished. "That guy was weak," Saitama muttered, shaking his hand. "No technique?" He continued walking. He finished his corn dog. He turned a corner and found himself face to chest with Solomon Grundy. The undead zombie giant was waiting blocking the street. Grundy was strong enough to trade blows with Superman. "Grundy kill bald man," the zombie roared. Saitama looked up. "You're really big. Are you a wrestler?" Grundy smashed a car flat with his fist to demonstrate his power. Grundy crush. Okay, Saitama said. "I'm in a hurry. The cactus store closes at 5. He walked past Grundy. Grundy grabbed him. His massive gray hand wrapped around Saitama's entire torso. He squeezed with a strength that had broken Green Lantern's constructs. Saitama didn't stop walking. He just kept moving forward. Grundy, holding on, was dragged along the pavement, his boots carving deep trenches in the concrete. Grundy. Confused, the zombie grunted, trying to hold back the tiny man. It was like trying to hold back a tectonic plate. "Let go," Saitama said. He shrugged his shoulders. The shrug dislocated both of Grundy's arms. The zombie fell back, howling in confusion and pain. Grundy, not like this game. Saitama checked his watch. Crap. 4:45. I gotta run. He broke into a jog. To the human eye, he vanished. The wind generated by his departure stripped the paint off the parked cars and blew the toupee off a man standing 3 blocks away. Location: LexCorp Tower. Lex Luthor watched the screens. All 3 feeds had gone black or static. Clayface dispersed, Mercy read from the tablet. Mirror Master equipment failure. Solomon Grundy psychological trauma and severe orthopedic damage. Lex didn't look angry. He looked ecstatic. He was trembling. "He didn't even fight them," Lex whispered. He sneezed on one. He walked past the other. He is perfect. He turned to the window, looking at the city that Superman claimed to protect. "Superman fights for truth and justice," Lex murmured. "He fights because he cares. He holds back because he's afraid of breaking us." He pressed his hand against the glass. But this Saitama, he doesn't care. He has no code, no restraint. He is a force of nature. And if I can point that force at Superman... Lex turned back to the console. He opened the file marked Project Doomsday 2.0. "Prepare the genetic sequence," Lex ordered. "We aren't just making a monster to kill Superman. We are making a monster that will force Superman to try. And when Superman tries and fails, and the bald man succeeds..." Lex smiled a rictus of pure malice. "Then the world will see that their god is just a man in a cape. And the bald man, he will be the new joke. A joke that kills the concept of heroism forever." Deploy the asset, Lex said. Target the city center. Make sure the cameras are rolling. Location the watchtower. Batman watched the footage of the tests. He saw the sneeze. He saw the shrug. He's not a martial artist, Batman said to Wonder Woman. He has no form. He leaves himself open constantly. It doesn't matter, Diana said, her voice grave. A fortress needs no shield if the walls are impenetrable. Bruce, if we have to fight him, how do we do it? Batman sat back in his chair. He looked at the image of Saitama eating the corn dog. We don't fight his body, Batman said. We can't. We fight his mind. His mind. He's bored, Batman said. He's detached. That's his weakness. He has no stake in this world. If we can't hurt him, maybe we can distract him, or maybe... Batman paused. A dangerous thought crossed his mind. Or maybe we point him at the things we can't kill. The alarm blared. A red light bathed the command deck. Priority alert. Seismic activity detected. Metropolis Plaza. Biological signature match. Kryptonian unknown. Doomsday Superman said, stepping onto the deck, his face pale. But different. It's starting, Batman said. Lex is making his move. I have to go, Superman said, turning to the teleporter. Clark, wait, Batman warned. This isn't a normal incursion. The energy readings are off the charts, and Saitama is in the area. Then I'll get him to safety, Superman said. He's strong, but Doomsday is... Doomsday. Superman vanished in a flash of light. Batman looked at the screen. He looked at the heat signature of the monster rising in Metropolis. And he looked at the dot representing Saitama, currently browsing a flower shop 2 blocks away. I hope you're right, Clark, Batman whispered. Because I think Doomsday is the one who needs protection. The crisis did not begin with a declaration of war. It began with a seismic event that registered a 9.2 on the Richter scale, centered not on a fault line, but on the manicured lawns of Centennial Park. The sky over Metropolis turned a sickly bruised violet as the containment pod launched from a LexCorp orbital stealth platform slammed into the Earth. The impact vaporized the Superman statue that stood in the park's center. Bronze turned to gas. The shockwave flattened every tree within a 3-mile radius, snapping century-old oaks like dry toothpicks and stripping the facades off the surrounding skyscrapers. From the crater, a cloud of superheated dust rose shaped like a mushroom, signaling the arrival of the end. Inside the dust, something roared. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the marrow of every living thing in the city. It was the sound of hate. Pure, distilled, ancient hate. Doomsday was back. But this was not the mindless gray beast that Superman had fought before. This was Lex Luthor's masterpiece. As the dust settled, the cameras of the news drones, shaking violently in the turbulence, captured the monster. He was larger, his skin a darker obsidian gray, covered in jagged bone spurs that glowed with an internal green, pulsing light. Kryptonite radiation. He had been spliced, evolved, and engineered to breathe the very poison that killed the Man of Steel. Location: Centennial Park. Time: 5:15 p.m. Wonder Woman was the first to make contact. She didn't wait for a plan. She knew that every second this thing drew breath was a death sentence for the city. She dropped from the sky like a spear of the gods, her sword of Hephaestus, a blade capable of slicing atoms, aimed directly at the monster's jugular. Hera, guide my hand, Diana screamed, her battle cry piercing the roar of the destruction. She struck true. The blade connected with Doomsday's neck. Clang. The sound was not of flesh being cut. It was the sound of a tuning fork shattering. The sword, forged by gods, snapped in half upon contact with the bone protrusions. Doomsday didn't even flinch. He turned his head, his red eyes burning with a terrifying intelligence, and backhanded the Amazon princess. The blow caught Diana on her shield. The shield held, but the force did not. She was launched backward at Mach 4, smashing through the daily planet globe, through the building behind it, and embedding herself deep into the bedrock of the subway system 3 miles away. Diana Superman screamed, descending from the clouds. He didn't hold back. There was no time for restraint. He hit Doomsday with the force of a planetary collision, driving both fists into the creature's chest. The impact created a crater within the crater. The ground liquefied. Windows shattered across the entire eastern seaboard. But Doomsday stood firm. His feet dug into the molten earth. He grabbed Superman's wrists. The green glow from his bone spurs flared, and Superman screamed a sound of agony that the people of Metropolis had never heard before. The kryptonite radiation was being pumped directly into his bloodstream through tactile contact. Die, Kryptonian. Doomsday growled. His voice was thick, wet, like boulders grinding together. He could speak. He headbutted Superman. The crack was sickening. Superman fell back, blood streaming from his nose and ears. He tried to fly to gain distance, but Doomsday was faster. The monster leaped, grabbing Superman's cape, and slammed him into the pavement with enough force to rupture the city's sewage and water mains beneath the street. Geysers of water and sludge erupted into the air, mixing with the fire and the dust. The city was drowning and burning at the same time. Location: the Metropolis Arms Motel, room 204. Time: 5:17 p.m. 6 blocks away from the epicenter of the apocalypse. The water pressure in the pipes fluctuated wildly. Saitama was in the shower. He had found this motel after walking for 30 minutes. It was cheap, it smelled of mildew, and the walls were thin. But it had a first night free coupon if you signed up for their rewards program. Saitama had signed up immediately. He was currently covered in a thick lather of motel soap. It was the cheap kind, the kind that smelled like industrial cleaner and dried out your skin, but he was enjoying the hot water. He was humming a tune, trying to wash off the grime of the day. The dust from the collapsed bank, the slime from Clayface, the sweat of the city. Just a hero for fun, he hummed, scrubbing his bald head until it squeaked. Gonna find a sale tomorrow. He reached for the shampoo bottle to rinse his eyes. He squeezed a generous amount onto his face. Okay, rinse time. He turned the handle. Nothing happened. The roar of the shower head died. The soothing stream of hot water sputtered, coughed once, and then stopped completely. A final sad drip echoed in the plastic tub. Saitama stood there, eyes squeezed shut, stinging with cheap soap. He turned the handle back and forth. Squeak, squeak, nothing. Hey, Saitama, said his voice echoing in the small, tiled room. You gotta be kidding me. I still have soap in my eyes. He tapped the shower head. Hello, water. Outside, a shockwave from Doomsday's rampage rattled the motel. The mirror above the sink cracked. The toothbrush holder fell into the toilet. My eyes are burning, Saitama yelled, groping blindly for the faucet. Is this a cutoff? Did I use too much? Is there a meter? The stinging in his eyes was intense. It was the specific sharp pain of chemical irritants. It made him angry. Not the heroic fury of seeing injustice, but the petty boiling rage of a man whose comfort had been interrupted by incompetence. Location: Centennial Park ruins. The battle was lost. Aquaman lay unconscious in the wreckage of a fountain, his trident bent like a pretzel. Flash was down his leg, shattered after tripping on a tectonic shift caused by Doomsday's stomp. Only Superman remained, but barely. He was on his knees in the center of the park. His suit was torn to shreds, revealing a chest that was bruised and bleeding purple blood. The kryptonite poisoning was shutting down his organs. His solar reserves were drained. He tried to stand, his legs shaking violently, but the weight of the world felt too heavy. "I cannot fall," Superman gasped, spitting blood. "If I fall, they die." Doomsday loomed over him. The monster had grown during the fight. He was now 12 feet tall, his bone spurs extending into long, jagged spikes. He radiated triumph. "No more gods." Doomsday roared, raising both fists, clasped together into a hammer of extinction. "Only doom." Around the perimeter, the National Guard and the police were frozen. They couldn't shoot. Doomsday was too close to Superman. Sergeant Miller, blood running down his forehead from a piece of flying debris, watched from behind a barricade. He was weeping. He held his phone, watching the live stream. The comments had stopped moving. The world was holding its breath. They were watching their savior die. "Get up, Big Blue," Miller whispered, clutching his rosary. "Please, get up." But Superman didn't get up. He looked up at the monster, his eyes dimming. He had nothing left. "Goodbye, Lois," Superman whispered. Doomsday brought his fists down. Crash. The sound of the impact was not the wet crunch of Kryptonian bone. It was the sound of metal pipes bursting. It was the sound of concrete being pulverized. A cloud of steam hissed violently into the air, obscuring the view. Doomsday roared in confusion. His fists had hit something. But it wasn't the soft flesh of the Kryptonian. It was something hard, something that didn't give. The steam cleared. Standing between Superman and Doomsday was a figure. He was not wearing armor. He was not wearing a supersuit. He was wearing a small white motel towel wrapped precariously around his waist. His upper body was wet. His bald head was shiny and covered in suds. His eyes were red and streaming with tears, not from sadness, but from soap. Saitama had one hand raised. He had caught Doomsday's double-fisted smash with his left palm. The ground beneath Saitama had not cracked. The force of the blow, capable of splitting a continent, had simply stopped at his hand. Saitama blinked, his eyes stinging furiously. He looked up at the towering monster. He looked really pissed off. "Hey," Saitama said. His voice wasn't a roar. It was a cold, flat statement of fact. Doomsday looked down. For the first time since his creation, the monster felt a flicker of an emotion that was not hate. It was confusion. "You," Doomsday growled. "Who are you?" Saitama ignored the question. He pointed a trembling finger at the ground, where a massive water main was spraying water uselessly into the dirt, severed by Doomsday's earlier attack. "You broke the pipes," Saitama said. What Doomsday paused. "I was in the shower." Saitama continued, his voice rising in volume. "I had soap in my eyes. Do you know how much that stings? It's the cheap kind, it burns." Superman, vision blurry, looked up at the man in the towel. "Run," he wheezed. He will kill you." Saitama looked down at Superman. He saw the battered hero, the blood, the ruin. He looked back at Doomsday. "You're big," Saitama said. "You're ugly, and you're really loud." He squeezed Doomsday's fist. Crack! The sound of Doomsday's indestructible bone spurs shattering echoed across the park. The monster howled a sound of genuine pain and tried to pull his hand back. He couldn't. Saitama's grip was absolute. "I'm going to teach you some manners," Saitama said. He wiped his soapy eyes with his free hand, making it worse. Oh, damn it. The irritation spiked. The serious series switch flipped in his brain, not because the world was ending, not because a god was dying, but because his bath had been ruined. Doomsday, realizing he was trapped, reacted with pure instinct. He fired a point-blank blast of concentrated kryptonite radiation from his eyes directly into Saitama's face. The green beams hit Saitama. Saitama didn't blink. He didn't burn. He just looked more annoyed. "Stop flashing lights in my face," Saitama said. "My eyes are already sensitive." He pulled. He yanked Doomsday downward. The 12-foot monster was jerked off his feet as if he weighed nothing. Saitama spun. "Serious move," Saitama muttered. "Serious table flip." But there was no table. There was only the street. Saitama jammed his fingers into the asphalt under Doomsday's falling body. He ripped the entire city block, a slab of concrete, earth, and sewage pipes weighing thousands of tons, into the air. He flipped it. Doomsday was launched upward, riding the slab of earth like a surfer on a tidal wave of concrete. The force of the flip generated a vertical wind tunnel that cleared the smoke from the entire city instantly. The monster flew. He flew past the skyscrapers. He flew past the clouds. He flew into the upper stratosphere, screaming in rage. Saitama stood there in his towel, holding the edge of the crater he had just created. He looked up at the sky, where the monster had vanished. "Stay up there until you learn to be quiet," Saitama shouted at the clouds. He turned to Superman. The Man of Steel was staring. His mouth was open. The kryptonite poisoning was fading now that the source was gone, but the shock was replacing it. "You," Superman whispered, "you saved me." Saitama looked at Superman. He looked at the broken water main spewing water into the air nearby. "Hey," Saitama said, walking over to the geyser. "Do you have a wrench? I need to finish rinsing my head." He stuck his head into the stream of dirty, high-pressure water blasting from the broken street pipe. He scrubbed his face vigorously, sighing with relief as the soap finally washed away. "Ah," Saitama said, shaking his head like a wet dog, sending droplets flying. "That's better." He looked at Superman again, water dripping from his nose. "You look terrible, man. You should put some ice on that." Around them, the silence was absolute. The news drones zoomed in. They captured the image that would define the era, the fallen god, broken and bleeding on the ground. And standing above him, clad only in a white motel towel, the bald man who had just thrown the apocalypse into orbit because of a plumbing issue. This was the crisis. And the resolution was the ultimate punchline to the joke of power. High above in his penthouse, Lex Luthor stared at the screen. The glass of brandy slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Lex whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and awe. "He treated Doomsday like trash." Sir Mercy said, her voice shaking. "The telemetry? Doomsday is currently passing the International Space Station. He is drifting away from Earth's gravity well." Lex started to laugh. It was a hysterical, broken sound. "I wanted to kill a god," Lex wheezed. "And instead, I found a man who treats gods like insects." Back in the park, Saitama adjusted his towel. It was slipping. "Crap," he muttered. "This is embarrassing." He looked at the crowd of stunned police officers and civilians peering out from the ruins. "Does anyone have a spare pair of pants?" Saitama asked. "I think I left mine in the room and the door locked behind me." The silence in Centennial Park was fragile, a thin sheet of glass stretching over a deep pit of absolute terror. The water from the broken main hissed against the hot asphalt, creating a curtain of steam that swirled around the man in the motel towel. Superman lay on his back, his chest heaving. The sun was yellow again, feeding him, knitting his cells back together. But the process was slow. He watched Saitama wring out the corner of his towel, the water dripping onto the boots of the fallen god. "You..." Superman coughed, the metallic taste of kryptonite still coating his tongue. "You threw him into orbit." "Yeah," Saitama said, shivering slightly as the wind picked up. He was loud, and I needed to rinse off. But now I'm cold. Seriously, does nobody have pants, a blanket, a curtains? Sergeant Miller, standing at the edge of the crater, started to unbuckle his belt. "Take mine. Take my pants," he shouted, frantic with gratitude. But before the trousers could be offered, the sky betrayed them. It started as a low vibration, a thrumming that rattled the teeth in Miller's skull. The birds that had begun to return to the park suddenly scattered, screeching. The clouds which had just cleared began to burn. High above the stratosphere, Doomsday was not drifting. Lex Luthor's genetic tinkering had given the monster one overriding imperative: survive to kill. In the cold vacuum of space, Doomsday's biology had reacted instantly to the lack of oxygen and the extreme cold. His skin had calcified into a heat shield denser than diamond. His internal organs shifted, pressurized, and his rage, an infinite self-sustaining engine, found a way to express itself. He kicked. Doomsday found a piece of debris, a chunk of the city block Saitama had flipped, floating near him in low orbit. He planted his feet against it and pushed. The debris was launched into deep space. Doomsday was launched back toward Earth. Gravity caught him. The atmosphere welcomed him with friction fire. He became a meteor, a kinetic kill vehicle aimed directly at the coordinates of his humiliation. Location: the Watchtower. Time 5:22 p.m. Impact warning. Cyborg screamed from the monitor deck. "He's coming back. Velocity is... oh my God. Mach 300, he's accelerating." Batman, watching the telemetry from the Batwing, gripped the controls until his leather gloves creaked. Trajectory. Centennial Park Cyborg reported, his voice hollow. "Bruce, the mass and velocity. If he hits the ground, it's not just Metropolis. It's an extinction-level event. The shockwave will crack the tectonic plate. The East Coast is gone." "Can we intercept?" Batman demanded. "No time." Wonder Woman's voice came over the comms, weak but alive from the subway tunnel. "I am too far. Clark is down. There is nothing that can stop a meteor that size moving that fast." Location: Centennial Park. The sky turned red. Not the red of sunset, but the violent, searing red of atmospheric entry. The air temperature spiked. The water from the broken pipe flashed into steam instantly. Superman looked up. He saw the fire. He knew the math. "He's back," Superman whispered, terror seizing his heart. "He's going to kill us all." He tried to stand to fly up and meet the doom, but his legs failed him. He collapsed, his solar reserves too low to generate flight. "No. Please." Saitama looked up. He shielded his eyes with one hand, holding his towel with the other. "He's really persistent," Saitama noted. "Like a telemarketer." The roar was audible now, a screaming tear in the sky that sounded like the earth itself was shrieking. The fireball grew larger, filling the horizon. The heat was already singing the grass. "Run," Miller screamed to the civilians. "Run." But there was nowhere to run. You don't outrun an asteroid. Saitama tightened the knot on his towel. "Hey," he said to Superman, "hold this." He tossed the wet bar of Motel's soap onto Superman's chest. "I'm going to punch him." Saitama bent his knees. The ground beneath him didn't just crack, it vanished. A circle of Earth 50 feet wide was instantly compressed into a dense disk of stone as Saitama launched himself. Boom. The launch created a shock wave that flattened Sergeant Miller and blew the windows out of the remaining skyscrapers. Saitama became a yellow and white blur, ascending vertically to meet the falling apocalypse. He rose to meet the fire. Doomsday, encased in a shell of burning plasma, saw the tiny speck rising to meet him. The monster roared extending a fist that was now covered in molten bone armor. He put everything he had into the descent. The weight of his hate, the gravity of the planet, the momentum of the fall. It was a punch designed to end a civilization. Saitama, rising at hypersonic speed, cocked his right arm back. He took a deep breath. His expression shifted. The boredom vanished. The annoyance vanished. For a split second, the man was gone, replaced by the avatar of absolute limitlessness. The shading on his face grew heavy. His eyes became sharp, focused, intense. "Killer move, Saitama," whispered into the roaring wind. He didn't aim for Doomsday's head. He didn't aim for the body. He aimed through the monster. Serious punch. The two forces met at an altitude of 10,000 feet. Doomsday's fist, Saitama's fist. There was no sound at first. The impact was too loud for the atmosphere to carry. There was only light. A flash of pure white kinetic energy that outshone the sun. Then the physics of the world snapped. The force of Saitama's punch didn't just stop Doomsday. It reversed the vector of every atom in the monster's body. The shockwave generated by the fist traveled forward, enveloping the beast. Doomsday didn't explode. He was erased. The kinetic pressure was so intense that his biological structure was disassembled at the molecular level. The bone armor, the Kryptonian DNA, the hate. It all turned into a fine glowing mist in a microsecond. But the punch didn't stop there. The shockwave continued upward. It hit the atmosphere. Down on the ground, Superman watched with wide, unbelieving eyes. He saw the sky split. The clouds which covered the entire northern hemisphere were sheared in half. A massive canyon of blue sky, thousands of miles wide, opened up instantly, stretching from the horizon to the zenith. The punch had parted the weather systems of the planet. The air pressure wave hit the ground a second later. Wham! It wasn't destructive. It was a wall of wind that pinned everyone to the floor, stripped the leaves off every tree in the state, and cleared the smoke from Metropolis, Gotham, and Central City in one breath. Silence returned. The fireball was gone. The monster was gone. The clouds were gone. There was just a clean blue sky, split perfectly down the middle by a trail of white vapor that extended into the vacuum of space. Gravity reasserted itself. A figure fell from the sky, fluttering like a leaf. Saitama landed in the center of the park. He landed gracefully, absorbing the impact with his knees. He stood up. The first thing he did was check his waist. "Oh, thank God," Saitama sighed, adjusting the white towel. It stayed on. That would have been a disaster. He looked at his right glove. It was smoking. The red rubber was slightly singed. "Man," he muttered, "I hit him pretty hard. Hope I didn't get any monster guts on me." He walked over to Superman, who was staring at him as if he were a ghost. Superman pushed himself up to a sitting position, the bar of soap sliding off his chest. "You..." Superman's voice was a whisper. "You split the sky." Saitama looked up. "Did I? It looks like it's going to be a nice day now. No rain." He picked up the soap. "Thanks for holding this." From the ruins of the subway entrance, Wonder Woman pulled herself out. She was battered, bleeding, her armor cracked. She looked at the sky. She had seen Zeus throw lightning bolts. She had seen Darkseid fire the Omega effect. She had never seen a punch that changed the weather on a continental scale. "By the gods," Diana whispered, falling to her knees. "He is not a man. He is a force." The civilians who had been huddled in terror began to stand up. They looked at the empty sky. They looked at the bald man in the towel. Someone started clapping. It was Sergeant Miller. He stood on top of his crushed cruiser, clapping his hands, tears streaming down his face. Then a kid joined in. then the camera crews, then the National Guard. The applause grew. It became a roar. It wasn't the polite applause for a speech. It was the primal, hysterical cheering of people who had looked death in the face and seen death get punched in the nose. Baldy, Baldy, Baldy. The chant started in the park and spread outward. Saitama looked around confused. Why are they chanting, he asked Superman. Is Baldy a compliment here? Because where I'm from, it's kind of rude. Superman smiled. It was a painful, bloody smile, but it was real. He looked at the man who had done what he couldn't. Today, Superman said, getting to his feet and offering a hand to Saitama, I think it's the highest title on Earth. Saitama looked at the hand. He shook it. Okay, Saitama said, but seriously, pants. I really need pants. Location: the shadows. Batman watched the feed from the Batwing. The computer had recorded the punch. The energy output reading simply said, infinity. Batman turned off the screen. He sat in the dark cockpit for a long moment. Clark was right, Batman said to the empty air. We don't need to contain him. He looked down at his shaking hands. We need to make sure he never gets bored enough to punch the planet. The climax was over. The boss was dead. The hierarchy of power had not just changed, it had been deleted. The aftermath of a god-level brawl is usually a time for speeches, slow-motion montages of rebuilding, and somber reflections on the cost of freedom. But the aftermath of the one-punch crisis was different. It was awkward. The dust had settled over Metropolis, revealing a city that looked like it had been chewed on by a giant dog. The skyscrapers leaned at jaunty angles. The streets were less roads and more canyons. And in the center of Centennial Park, the crater left by Saitama's jump was being rapidly filled by water from the broken mains, creating an accidental lake that the locals were already calling Baldy's Pond. Location: Centennial Park Temporary Command Post. Time: 6:45 p.m. Saitama was finally wearing pants. They were a pair of oversized gray sweatpants donated by a National Guard and heavy gunner named Tiny. They were 3 sizes too big, cinched tight at the waist with a piece of yellow police tape. He was also wearing a black t-shirt that said, Metropolis PD. We serve and protect on the back, and I survived Doomsday, handwritten in marker on the front. He sat on a folding chair eating a slice of pizza that had been brought to him by the mayor himself. It's a little greasy, Saitama critiqued, holding the slice up to the light, but free food is free food. Around him, the Justice League was holding an emergency debriefing. It was less of a tactical meeting and more of a group therapy session. Superman sat on a crate of medical supplies, his arm in a sling made of solar-charged bandages. He was healing, but the trauma of the kryptonite beating was deep. He watched Saitama eat with a look of profound, existential curiosity. Wonder Woman was polishing her shield, trying to buff out the dent from Doomsday's backhand. She kept glancing at Saitama, her eyes narrowing as if trying to decipher a riddle written in an alien language. Flash was leaning on crutches, vibrating his cast so fast it was smoking. So Flash said, breaking the silence. Just to recap, you punched him into nothing. Like there's no body, no trophy, no souvenir. He evaporated, Saitama said, chewing the crust. It happens. Sometimes I hit them too hard. Batman stood in the shadows of the command tent, his cape wrapped around him. He hadn't taken his eyes off Saitama for an hour. The UN is calling Batman, said his voice gravel. They want to know if you're a weapon of mass destruction. They want to know your allegiance. They want to know if you plan to conquer the planet. Saitama swallowed the pizza. Conquer. That sounds like a lot of paperwork. I just want to go home. Speaking of home, do you guys know how to fix a dimensional rift? I think I fell through one in the alley behind Starbucks. We can send you back, Batman said. We have the technology. But first we need to understand. How? What is the source of your power? The entire league leaned in. This was it. The secret. Was he a god, a mutant, a magical construct? Saitama wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked at them seriously. The shadows returned to his face. It's simple, Saitama said. You guys want to be strong. Here's the secret. Superman held his breath. Wonder Woman stopped polishing. Batman started recording. 100 push-ups, Saitama said. 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run. Every single day. The silence stretched. A seagull squawked in the distance. That's it, Flash asked, his voice cracking. That's a standard warm-up routine. It's not just a warm-up. Saitama slammed his hand on his knee. You have to do it until your hair falls out. You have to do it even when your muscles are screaming. You have to turn off the AC in the summer to strengthen the mind. It's hell, but that is the only way. Wonder Woman looked at Superman. Is he mocking us? I don't think so, Superman whispered. I'm looking at his heart rate. He believes it. He genuinely believes that basic calisthenics made him strong enough to punch a hole in reality. It is biologically impossible, Batman stated flatly. Muscle hypertrophy has limits. Lactic acid buildup would... Whatever, Saitama interrupted, standing up. It worked for me. Maybe you guys just need to train harder. He stretched his arms. Anyway, about that ride home, I have a cactus that needs watering. And if I'm gone too long, Genos is going to freak out and probably incinerate the neighborhood looking for me. Genos, Superman asked. My disciple Saitama said. Cyborg guy, blonde, kind of intense. Writes down everything I say. You'd like him. Location. The streets of Metropolis. The cleanup had begun, but the mood was different. Usually after a crisis, there was fear. People looked at the sky, wondering when the next monster would fall. But today there was laughter. On a street corner, a group of teenagers were filming a TikTok. They weren't posing like Superman. They were doing the Saitama face, slack-jawed, bored eyes, and then slapping the air. Hashtag #OneSlap was trending worldwide. Merchandise was already appearing. T-shirts with a crude drawing of a bald head and the word, okay. The cult of the bald had begun. It wasn't a religion of worship. It was a religion of irreverence. It was the realization that you didn't need a cape or a tragic backstory to be the strongest. You just needed to be a guy. Lex Luthor sat in his cell at Stryker's Island Penitentiary. He had surrendered quietly after Doomsday was vaporized. He was watching the news on a small TV in the corner. Look at them, Lex muttered to the empty cell. They aren't cheering for a savior. They're cheering for a joke. He leaned back on his cot, a smile touching his lips. I won, Lex whispered. Superman is alive, but the idea of Superman is dead. Why worship a sun god when a bald man in pajamas can save you faster? The mystique is gone. The awe is gone. He laughed. Thank you, bald man. You did what I never could. You made them ordinary. Location: the Watchtower Teleportation Bay. Time 8:00 p.m. The dimensional breach had been calibrated. Zatanna and Dr. Fate had been called in to stabilize the metaphysical coordinates, weaving a spell that would bridge the gap between the DC universe and Saitama's home dimension. Saitama stood on the platform. He was holding a plastic bag provided by Alfred. Inside were 24 high-quality eggs bubble-wrapped, a premium daikon radish, a voucher for free pizza for life at any Metropolis pizzeria, a brand-new custom-tailored cape made of indestructible Kryptonian fabric, a gift from Superman. This is nice material, Saitama said, feeling the cape. Silky. Does it shrink in the wash? It is impervious to heat, cold, and friction, Superman said, standing by the console. He looked recovered, though his eyes were tired. It should last. Saitama nodded. Thanks. You guys aren't so bad. A little dramatic with the speeches, but decent. He looked at Batman. You should smile more. You're gonna get wrinkles. Batman didn't smile, but he gave a curt nod. Safe travels. One thing Wonder Woman said, stepping forward. What is your hero name? In your world? Caped Baldy Saitama sighed. The Hero Association gave it to me. I hate it. Here, Superman said. We will remember you as something else. What? The One Punch Man. Saitama shrugged. Oh, sounds kind of violent, but okay. The portal hummed to life. A swirling vortex of gray and yellow light opened up. Through the rift, they could hear the faint sounds of Z-City Sirens' construction noise and a robotic voice shouting, Sensei. That's my cue, Saitama said. He stepped onto the pad. He turned back one last time. Hey, he called out to the gods of Earth. If you ever come to my town, look me up. We can play video games. King is really good, but I'm getting better. We will flash, said, waving his crutch. Saitama stepped into the light. Zelpy. He was gone. The room felt empty. The energy in the watchtower dropped. The presence of the limitless had vanished, leaving the world feeling suddenly small and fragile again. Superman walked to the window, looking down at the blue marble of Earth. He's gone, Diana said. The balance is restored. Is it? Superman asked softly. I feel lighter. For years I thought I had to be the strongest. I thought the safety of the world depended entirely on my limits. He touched the glass, but knowing he is out there, somewhere in the multiverse, knowing there is a ceiling I will never reach. It's liberating. I don't have to be a god, Diana. I just have to be Superman. Batman walked up behind them. Don't get too comfortable. We still have to fix the city. And Luthor is already plotting his appeal. Back to work, then, Superman said, turning from the window. The weight was back on his shoulders, but it felt manageable now. Location: Z-City Saitama's apartment. Saitama stumbled out of the portal and landed on his living room rug. Sensei Genos shouted, his incinerator cannons glowing. You have been missing for 6 hours. I detected a dimensional anomaly. I was preparing to scorch the fabric of space-time to find you. Easy, Genos. Easy, Saitama said, holding up the bag. I just took a detour, but look. He pulled out the eggs. They were intact. I got the eggs, Saitama beamed. And I got a free cape. Genos scanned the cape. Sensei, this fabric, the molecular density is off the charts. It is alien technology. Where did you acquire this? Some guy with his underwear on the outside gave it to me, Saitama said, walking to the kitchen. He was weird, but nice. He put the water on to boil. Tonight is Hot Pot Genos, and it's going to be the best one ever. As the steam rose from the pot, Saitama looked out the window at the moon. For a second he thought about the guy in the red cape and the big monster and the clapping. He flexed his hand. Maybe next time, he whispered to himself, I'll find someone who can take 2 punches. He sighed. Probably not. The dust of Metropolis did not settle for 3 days. It hung in the air, a fine, glittering mist composed of pulverized concrete, shattered glass, and the microscopic remnants of an alien monster that had once threatened to end history. But unlike the dust of previous battles, the dark, choking soot of Darkseid's invasions, or the radioactive ash of Brainiac's probes, this dust felt different. It sparkled. It caught the light of the midday sun and turned the ruined avenues into hazy, dreamlike corridors. The city was wounded, yes. The skyline was a jagged set of teeth where buildings had been snapped in half. The subway system was a labyrinth of twisted metal. But the sound that filled the air was not the wail of sirens or the weeping of the bereaved. It was the sound of hammers. Thousands of them. Location, Suicide Slum Alley 4B. Time 2 weeks after the event. Leo, a 12-year-old boy with paint under his fingernails and an oversized hoodie, stood on a milk crate. He was shaking a can of spray paint, the metal ball bearing rattling inside with a rhythmic clack, clack, clack that echoed off the brick walls. Before him was a mural. It was an old one commissioned by the city council years ago. It depicted the Trinity Superman in flight, looking benevolent. Wonder Woman with her lasso looking regal. Batman in the shadows looking vigilant. It was a beautiful piece of art, a testament to the gods who lived in the sky. But Leo wasn't looking at the gods. He was looking at the empty space next to Superman's cape. Yo, Leo, his friend Marcus called out from the street, keeping a lookout for cops. Hurry up, man. The patrols are heavier since the chief took over. Chill. Leo muttered, tongue sticking out the corner of his mouth in concentration. You can't rush art. He pressed the nozzle. Hiss. He didn't use gold paint. He didn't use royal blue or crimson red. He used a flat matte beige for the circle. Then he used white for the cape. Then he grabbed a thick black marker for the eyes. 2 dots. 2 simple, unimpressed black dots. And a straight line for a mouth. It took him 30 seconds to paint the figure standing next to Superman. In the mural, Superman looked like he was straining muscles taut, carrying the weight of the world. The figure Leo painted looked like he was waiting for a bus. Leo stepped back. He tilted his head. Perfect, he whispered. He switched cans and sprayed a single word underneath the new figure. It wasn't hero. It wasn't God. Okay. Marcus walked over, squinting at the wall. It looks kinda stupid, bro. It's just a circle. That's the point, Leo said, capping his can. Superman is complicated. He's an alien. He has a fortress. This guy, he's just a guy. He's simple. Leo looked at his drawing, then up at the real sky, which was currently a piercing, unbroken blue. My dad says he saw him. Leo said quietly. Says he was wearing a towel. Says he looked like he wanted to go home. If a guy in a towel can slap doomsday, then maybe we don't need to be afraid of the monsters anymore. This was the quiet revolution. There were no riots. There was no burning of effigies. There was just a collective citywide realization that the pedestal the Justice League stood on wasn't quite as high as they thought. The terror of the supervillain had been defanged. Every time a criminal put on a costume, now people didn't scream. They remembered the slap. They remembered the eggs. They remembered that power wasn't about the costume. It was about the person inside it. Location: Metropolis, Police Precinct 1. The roof. Sergeant now, Captain Tom Miller, stood by the bat signal. It was cold, dark, and dormant. The giant lens, usually polished to a shine, had a thin layer of grime on it. Miller placed a hand on the cold metal casing. For 20 years, this light had been his prayer. When things got bad, when the demons crawled out of the sewers, he turned on the light and begged the sky for help. He looked at his own reflection in the glass. The bandage on his forehead was gone, leaving a fresh pink scar. Captain. Miller turned. It was the rookie officer Evans. The kid looked different too. He stood straighter. His uniform was pressed. He wasn't shaking. The 5th Street gang is moving on the debris salvage site, Evans reported. They're trying to steal the intergang scrap metal. Did you call the watchtower? Miller asked, testing him. Evans frowned. No, sir. Why would I? It's our city. We can handle a few looters. Miller smiled. It was a grim, tired smile, but it reached his eyes. Good answer, Miller said. He patted the bat signal not with reverence, but with a sense of closure. Leave the light off, Evans. We don't need to bother them. They have their job. We have ours. Miller walked to the edge of the roof. He looked out at the lights of Metropolis, flickering back to life, grid by grid. Besides, Miller whispered to the wind, if things get really bad, I know a guy who works for coupons. Location, the watchtower. Deep core monitor room. The atmosphere in the satellite was sterile cold and heavy with unspoken tension, while the Earth celebrated the guardians of reality were staring at a screen that showed something terrifying. The Flash Barry Allen stood next to Batman. Barry wasn't vibrating. He was frozen, still, his mask off, staring at the telemetry data from the Speed Force. It's not healing, Bruce Barry said softly. Usually when reality breaks like a boom tube or a temporal shift, the Speed Force patches it. It's like scar tissue. It heals. He pointed to the graph. The line representing the stability of the local space-time continuum was jagged, spiking with irregular golden energy. This isn't healing, Barry said. It's leaking. Explain, Batman ordered. He was typing furiously, running simulations that were returning results that made no sense. Saitama Barry said the name carefully. He didn't just move fast. He didn't just hit hard. When he punched Doomsday, he punched the concept of the fight. He applied infinite kinetic energy to a finite universe. Barry tapped the screen. A simulation showed a hairline fracture running through the fabric of the multiverse, located exactly at the coordinates of Centennial Park. He cracked the shell, Bruce. The pressure of his existence. It was too much for our physics. We're stable for now, but that crack, it's a doorway. Batman stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the silence. A doorway to where... Everywhere, Barry whispered, or nowhere, his universe. It operates on different rules, joke rules, gag manga rules, and by bringing those rules here, he infected our reality. Look at the probability data. Batman looked. The probability of absurd events had spiked by 400% since Saitama left. The Joker's toxins were becoming less lethal and more slapstick. Darkseid's invasion fleet had been delayed due to a logistical error. The grimdark nature of their reality was being lightened. We have been changed, Batman said, his voice low. The anomaly is gone, but the echo remains. Is it dangerous? Barry asked. Batman looked at the image of the crack, a faint golden fissure in the wall of the world. I don't know, Batman admitted. And for the Dark Knight, that was the most terrifying admission of all. But I know this. The walls between realities are thinner than we thought. He punched a hole. And now, other things might see the light coming through. Location, a void between universes. The camera pulls back, way back, past the watchtower. Past the Earth, past the boundaries of the DC Universe source wall. We drift into the white void of the overspace, the space between the panels of the cosmic comic book. Here, the serious punch had left a mark, a trail of white ink that smeared across the darkness, connecting one bubble of reality to another. In the silence of the void, a sound echoed. Thump, thump. It wasn't a heartbeat. It was footsteps. Heavy, metallic footsteps, and then a voice, Yas Thunk, not the voice of a hero or a villain or a monster, but the voice of an observer. Fascinating, the voice rumbled, a variable that rejects the narrative, a character that cannot be scaled. A shadow fell over the crack in the DC universe. If he can break that world, the voice mused, drifting toward the golden fissure. I wonder what he would do to mine. Location Z City, Saitama's apartment. The hot pot was boiling. The smell of high-quality beef and fresh radish filled the small, cluttered room. It was the smell of victory. Saitama sat on the floor, holding his bowl with trembling anticipation. Genos sat opposite him, notebook ready, pen poised. Sensei Genos said intensely, "Please, I must know. When you faced the doomsday creature, what was your tactical assessment? How did you calculate the trajectory of this serious table flip to ensure zero civilian casualties while maximizing orbital velocities?" Saitama blew on a piece of tofu. Tactical, what Saitama asked, popping the tofu into his mouth. Hot. The strategy, Genos pressed. The martial art? The philosophy? Saitama swallowed the tofu. He looked at his disciple. He looked at the steam rising from the pot. Genos, Saitama said, wisdom lighting up his eyes. The strategy was, I wanted to finish the fight before the supermarket closed. But I failed, so I was annoyed. He took another bite. Also, that big gray guy, he stepped on my foot. It really hurt. Genos scribbled furiously. Key to ultimate power. Righteous annoyance combined with foot protection. I see, Genos muttered. Profound. Saitama smiled. It was a rare, genuine smile. Not the bored face, not the serious face. Just the face of a man enjoying a meal after a long, weird day at work. Eat up, Genos, Saitama said. Tomorrow is supermarket day. I heard there's a sale on cabbage in the next dimension over. Maybe we should check it out. Outside the window, the moon shone down. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could see that the crater on the moon wasn't just a crater anymore. It looked a little bit like a dent. Or maybe, just maybe, a reminder that even in a world of gods and monsters, the strongest force in the universe is just a guy who refuses to miss dinner. And so the timeline heals, but the scar remains. The people of Metropolis learned that gods can bleed, that monsters can be tossed like trash, and that sometimes the savior of the world isn't the one with the S on his chest, but the one with the grocery bag in his hand. This was the story of the capeless anomaly. A story of what happens when the rules of drama meet the rule of cool and physics decides to take the day off. But the crack in the speed force is still there. The golden light is leaking. And the multiverse is a crowded place. There are other worlds that need shaking up. Other gods that need a reality check. If you enjoyed this journey into the absurd, if you want to see where the next fracture leads, and if you believe that a single punch can change everything, then you know what to do. I am your narrator. The door to the multiverse is open. Walk with me to the next one.